This is Good morning, everybody. This is the May 20th session of the Oregon Public Defense Commission, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. And Mara, could you please take a roll call?
Yes, happy to. Good morning, everybody. Commissioner Inglesman,
Here.
Commissioner Harvey is excused. Commissioner Kay,
Here.
Commissioner Knabb, Commissioner Leininger is excused. Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Commissioner Plummer,
Here.
Representative Evans, not present. Senator Przansky, not present. Vice Chair Mandelberg,
Here.
and Chair Harris.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, good morning. We hope to get done on time today. The first item on our agenda is the public comment. We'll start with that today. We received one written comment from Reed Kachikawa. That's been posted on the OPDC website and shared with the board. We've also received two requests for verbal comment. Each commenter will have 3 minutes to speak, and at the end of their time will be moved to the spectator side of the meeting. You can call the first commentator. I'll list them below in order that they signed up. The first will be Carl McPherson, the second Clint Oborn. Mara, go ahead. Get that started. Or Carl, if you're already on the panel.
Yes, good morning, Chair Harris and Commissioners. Thank you. My name is Carl McPherson. I'm the Executive Director of Metropolitan Public Defender and a member of Public Defenders of Oregon. First of all, I want to say that I fully support, as does MPD, of course, PDO's letter that was sent to all of you on May 18th. Agree with every sentence and word that's in that letter. Secondly, attached to the letter was an article from The Guardian that was published recently. That article is illuminating and accurate and person-centered as to what it feels like to be an individual and go unrepresented at this time, particularly individuals that are actually innocent of the charges that they were charged with. It also is very accurate as how it feels to be a public defense provider in a crisis community. The article is revealing as to the rhetoric and stressors that are put on the people doing the work in our communities. It's also accurate into how hard nonprofit public defenders are working and all full-time public defenders are working. And I would just indicate that people should look at the public dashboard to see, since macularization is the current metric that OPDC has, and that OPDC creates those MAC numbers to show that MPD is at 102.64% on this contract cycle in Multnomah County and 101.73% in Washington County. So any indication that MPD is not doing everything it possibly can is just false. Our people are working incredibly hard. Our attorneys are not working 40 hours a week. They're working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, particularly when they're in trial. So I want to make that point. It was a year ago that I was at a national conference at NAPD in Baltimore, where there were leaders from all across the country that came to discuss the issues in public defense and the issues that every single person had. All these leaders from the majority of the states in our country were caseloads, workloads, and recruitment and retention. That is an issue for us and will continue to be an issue for us for multiple reasons. And I just wanted to direct the commission to a couple things. One, recruitment and retention is extremely challenging. We recruit all year long because we have to. And in the last month, we've had 5 minor felony team attorneys resign in Multnomah County. And I know that the reasons, at least some of the reasons why, some are personal, but some of them are dealing with caseloads, workloads, the rhetoric that is in this county, and the significant pay disparity. So I wanted to highlight that for the commission. And I would just ask for your continued support of ethical and effective caseloads, your continued support for increasing resources for those of us who are doing full-time public defense. And lastly, in 2011, the North Carolina Indigent Defense System created a report showing that prosecution resources were 3 times defense resources. Sixth Amendment Center indicated it's 17 times or more in their Gideon's report from 2023. I'd really appreciate if the commission could do a study showing that prosecution resources far exceed public defense resources in the state of Oregon, as I'm hearing more and more rhetoric around the idea or the implication that public defense is resourced better than prosecution, which is false. Thank you for your continued support and your hard work. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. McPherson. Is Clint Oborn here? Are you on board?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead, Clint.
Okay. Commissioners, thank you. I'm Clint Oborn. I'm the Executive Director of Southern Oregon Public Defender, Inc., as well as a member of Public Defenders of Oregon. I've been involved in public defense, shoveling the proverbial coal for the last 16 years. I'm here to address two issues on the agenda and one tangentially connected. The unrepresented numbers, as well as the trial division budget, and the requested item from last meeting of discussing pay disparity between providers. First, in regards to the unrepresented numbers, specifically in regards to Jackson County, I think the information on your slide is going to be outdated. It was initially provided by me, but I know it's now outdated. If you'll look at the Power by dashboard, you'll find that Jackson County Nonprofit, or SOPD, despite losing multiple attorneys during this contract cycle to the higher paid STD, and still having to train incoming and burgeoning public defenders with less attorneys, has maintained the required quota for March. The nonprofit is over 100%. For the contract cycle, we're still in the A grade range of 94.82%. But we as a nonprofit and public defense offices are more than mere numbers and percentages. We are the ARIA of canaries in the coal mines. We see the dangers locally and with far greater insight than state agencies with difficult political agendas to tiptoe around. I ask that the Commission still listen to us nonprofit offices while we are able to make the rollers, warblers, and choppers of the canary song, because as we all know, when canaries go silent, we are too late. To this end, I appreciate the Commission's willingness to address the immense and increasing pay disparity between providers, and I especially appreciate multiple commissioners' requests at last month to put this matter on today's agenda. I'm hopeful that this will occur productively and be solutions-oriented and not merely a consolatory motion. I suggest that to do this, the Commission needs to address the burden placed on nonprofit public defense providers to recruit and retain public defenders to the workforce, and how the actions of OPDC are accelerating the pay gap between the STD and nonprofit public defenders. Claiming cost saving on contracts by cutting funding and apportioning that money back to its own growth is not only a short-term distraction, but also the ringing of a long-term death knell for public defense in Oregon. If you want to promote long-term stability and strategic growth in the system, you need to put forth policy option packages that support remedies to the problem. Funding to independent nonprofits in recruitment and retention dollars, not policies disguised as stabilizing merely growing expensive STDs. In Southern Oregon, while SOPD has lost 5 experienced attorneys for wage increases at the STD since its inception, SOPD also currently has 5 recent graduates set to start in October, recruiting people to the area. In times of financial cuts, we need to apportion funding to the remedy that we know works, not towards trying to fund a new growth of the STD. As the canary, I ask you to please address the problem of pay disparity now, not with platitudes, but with real policies and actions that will grow the long-term workforce of public defenders in this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. Next item on the agenda, and thank you all for commenting and being here and taking your time to help us be better informed. Next item is the unrepresented persons in Oregon courts update by Director Sandgren.
Thank you, Chair Harris. There's my PowerPoint. Just have a few slides for our update today. As we've been doing the past several months, we attached our full unrepresented update that we circulate amongst stakeholders across the state to your meeting materials. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have in greater detail on those. And so the summary I have today just is 3 or 4 slides, also with some Roberts discussion and an update on our efforts in Multnomah County in their rapid resolution docket. Next slide, please, Maura. So first, just the primary takeaways from our report that was released looking backwards at April 2026. We've seen a slight decrease in the number of unrepresented individuals as of April 30th relative to the end of March. The decrease was modest, around 26 or around 2% of the total number of unrepresented individuals. We've also continued to see more exits as opposed to entries onto the list for the past 11 of 12 months. And our assignment coordinators assigned over 500 cases and around 120 subject to BetChart during the month of April. Next slide, please. We also have been working to set up our new rapid resolution docket in Multnomah County. This is based on efforts that we previewed first during the short legislative session and have been working furiously to set up since then. We have an initial, some preliminary data from that program, looking at the number of folks who are being brought into that program, as well as the results of our first docket day that occurred in mid-April. So we have through the first 52 days of the program, so just short of 2 months, 110 cases have entered the program. 100 of those cases have been assigned to the trial division here at OPDC. 6 cases were assigned to non-OPDC attorneys, and then 4 defendants failed to appear at their initial arraignment, and so were not assigned attorneys. 43 cases were included in the initial docket day on the 14th of April, and the number of cases that were resolved via plea were around 46%. We had a smaller number of folks who failed to appear, and then even smaller numbers where the state could not proceed or the defendant rejected the initial plea offer, and then those cases were retained by the assigned attorneys. We look forward to being able to report more often on these docket days as they begin to happen month to month. And so we plan to bring more data forward in the future, but this is the first look that we received last Friday on the numbers that we have in this program. Next slide, please. We also released this month a supplement that we've been including the past few months on the state v. Roberts impact across the state. And we're continually trying to refine the data that we provide so that we can have a way of analyzing the Roberts impact on both the unrepresented list and then eventually on refiles that we see that may re-enter unrepresented status going forward. So this was our second release. As of the end of April, a little over 1,700 cases were dismissed due to Roberts, though the greatest number of those was back in February, with a little over 1,200 cases being dismissed in February. Since then, so through March and then in April as well, it's more in the 100 to 200 range as far as number of cases that are exiting the unrepresented list because of Roberts. We still do see that the vast majority of unrepresented cases dismissed due to Roberts were in Multnomah County, which accounted for more than half of all Roberts dismissals across the state, and then Washington County as well. Though, as stated, the numbers are declining since February, when the initial large number of Roberts dismissals occurred. Then next slide, please, Mara. And then lastly, I do want to provide a correction to the data that I presented last month in this meeting. Last month, my bad eyes got the best of me. My wife always asks me for opinions on colors to paint the house for our different rooms in the house, and I always tell her that I'm almost functionally colorblind. And so last time I confused our number of felonies versus the number of probation violation dismissals because the two colors were so similar. So I asked staff to do some colors that are more different. But as you can see, we have the corrected or the correct figure here today that shows that the majority of cases that are being dismissed due to Roberts are felonies and misdemeanors, unsurprisingly, with misdemeanors being a slightly smaller number. Going forward, we'll make sure that my bad eyes do not lead to misstatements in meetings going in the future. So mea culpa on that one. We'll be happy to take any questions that folks have. That's the conclusion of my presentation.
Any questions from Commission? I don't see. I have one question for you. Oh, Stephanie, Commissioner Engelson, go ahead.
Yeah, I realize that I wonder whether the materials that I'm looking at, sorry, I'll take my hand down, are coming up in another presentation. So I want to make sure I don't ask them prematurely. But I was looking at all these graphs that were, oh no, they're in here. So I guess my first question is statewide, and maybe I'm reading the numbers incorrectly, but I noticed from March 31st, 2026 to April 30th of 2026, the out of custody number statewide went down while the in custody number went up. And maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I would love for you to explain, should we be prioritizing in custody defendants so that we don't see, I would just love an explanation to what I'm seeing there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, that's a great question. When I look at the in custody numbers, if you look at the dashboard or if you look at the illustration and the materials that we provided, there's a lot less stability in those in custody numbers, right? There's smaller numbers, first of all, but then the trends up and down, even within larger, more long-term trends, are pretty substantial. And so when we see that in the data, I think that oftentimes that's more attributable to the point in time that we look at the data. So, for example, I thought about this exact same thing as I was preparing for this morning, and so I went on the unrepresented dashboard this morning, and that number as of today is now down to 70 in custody folks. And so, if we took
Okay.
a snapshot today, we would be able to say, oh, there's a several percentage point decrease in the number of in custody numbers. And so, not that I am not fully concerned about anybody who is in custody who is not represented, but a small percentage point increase or decrease in those numbers, just from a pure data perspective, it doesn't worry me too much because we see so much variation and fluctuation over time. And so it is certainly something we're monitoring. All of our case assignment coordinators have prioritization lists that include both Betchart and Roberts prioritizations, but in all of those, we're prioritizing in custody unrepresented individuals over out of custody folks. And so that is something that we're already doing. We're certainly aware of those data trends, but like I said, it's not something that gives me a ton of heartburn simply because it's quite noisy from a data perspective, depending on the day we look at it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That's my only question.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions?
I think I saw Commissioner Kay's hand.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I might have missed it too, but do we have data yet on how many of these cases are being refiled, if any?
Mostly anecdotal. For example, in the data that we received for the rapid resolution docket, I would have to go back and check, but we were able to suss out that there was a number of cases. I believe it was under 10. It was a small number that were Roberts refiles. We're still waiting for that data to be collected and then provided to us by OJD. My understanding is that there's also going to be a slight different take on how those cases are renumbered or not renumbered, depending on whether you're in Multnomah County or the rest of the state. And so I think there's still some details that are being worked out. Certainly, as soon as we have that, that's something I'm very interested in. They'll be included in the Roberts monthly updates and then in my monthly updates once we have that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Plummer?
Thank you. My question's about the early resolution docket. Just from a MAC calculation percentage, when the trial division takes those 100 cases off the early resolution docket, are those counted as part of state trial division MAC, or do they go into a separate bucket, so to speak?
That one, it's depended on the resolution docket in the past, and I'll return with greater detail on how we're doing it in Multnomah County. In the past, we were only counting a case as MAC for the trial division when the case resolved. If the case did not resolve, if it was retained, then it would be counted. But if it was, for example, in Marion County, some of the cases that were not resolved were then given to other attorneys who are non-trial division attorneys. So those cases were not counted as MAC for the trial division. And so there's a little bit of nuance by program, but that's something that I could come back with and we could talk about how that's been counted for different programs at a future meeting. We could probably have that ready for June.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Other questions? I have a question following up on Commissioner Plummer's question, actually. First of all, I'm assuming that in the rapid response docket in Multnomah County is for newly filed cases, then it's not for people who have been on the unrepresented list, other than if it's been dismissed for Robert, I know. But if it's a new filing, those are the cases that are going through the rapid response docket.
I believe that there are some that were already on the list, but I'll have to get back to you on that to make sure.
Okay. And secondly, I do think it's important when we're comparing Mac and apples to apples and oranges to oranges and I've talked to Aaron about this in the past, that if it is a early resolution type docket, that needs to be counted separately from the Mac, and because that's how the agency contracts with entities. They do not get to count they just get basically an FTE basis, not a MAC basis on those. And I think it's fair to count them in some way, by the way. But unless they are assigned to a trial lawyer, post rejection, they shouldn't be counted in MAC. That's my suggestion, so that we are very clear as to capacities between the various types of providers.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we'll come back with more detail on that.
Thank you. Anything else on that, Ken?
No more information from me on unrepresented, unless there are more questions.
Okay.
Oops, it looks like Commissioner Knabb has his hand up.
I just wanted to second what Rob said, and I think that when you're counting MAC, the early resolution, it's not apples to apples in those cases, and in assessing those for MAC, I would just also strongly urge the trial division to not be counting the early resolution cases that didn't that resolved at that early stage. I think that's an important point. I just wanted to reiterate.
Thank you. The next item is director's update. Ken?
My director's update today is very brief, and I don't have any slides for those, but it's partially because some of the budget discussion that we'll have is on its own separate line item. So really, all I have are announcements on upcoming meetings. We do have our governance committee meeting coming up on May 28th from 4 to 5:30 p.m. That is a virtual meeting, as is standard. We're going to be talking about defining key terms and concepts for key performance metrics. We're going to talk about our complaint policy that's being created by OPDC staff. And we are also potentially discussing board review of OPDC executive director in addition to the DAS annual review that's already performed. And then on Thursday, June 11th, we will be having our in-person meeting in Bend, coinciding with the OCDLA conference. We will be in Cascade F, and we do encourage members of the public and our stakeholders to attend. We will also live stream the meeting on Zoom, just like we're doing here today. Just as a note, because that meeting is so early in the month, we do not have a work group meeting scheduled for June. So our next work group meeting will not be until July. And we'll be talking about all of those dates when we're talking about June, but we'll be turning around pretty quickly for our next commission meeting. And I'm looking forward to, we have almost every commissioner is able to attend in person. And so we're really looking forward to that. Mara is also scouting out a place for a dinner the night before for folks who are able to come up the evening before so that we can have a little bit of food together as well. So looking forward to seeing everybody at the meeting.
Great. All right. Thanks, Ken. Next item is the Financial Case Management System report, David Martin and the FCMS team. Is David on board here?
Present.
All right, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is David Martin. I am the Chief Information Officer for OPDC. I'm here this morning to give an update on the Financial and Case Management System. But before I jump into a short overview of what FCMS is and what it will do, I'd like to explain a little bit about who and how this project has been supported over these last 2 years that we've been working at this. I'll start off with the prospective vendor. They can be named publicly after we sign the contract in a few weeks, but unfortunately, because this is a public meeting, they are the prospective vendor. But they are leaders in the financial case management technology space. Their systems are CGIS compliant, which means that they have strict security controls on how our data is stored, secured, and handled. They have expertise in working at every level of government. They have specifically have state of Oregon experience, so they understand how this technology is required to operate within the state of Oregon technology ecosystem. Then we have Baker Tilly as our change management vendor. When you take on such a monumental project like this that touches every part of our agency and our external providers, we must be thoughtful and intentional with how FCMS will change our agency, how it will impact staff, and how it will impact our providers. Baker Tilly helps us be forward thinkers in this space. They provide a vehicle for engagement and tools and strategies to help us as we are all experiencing these changes. Then we have Ron Hittner. He's one of our oversight partners. You'll hear from him actually firsthand shortly. He is a third-party unbiased partner that validates and communicates out project risks through the life of this project. The state of Oregon also has a project oversight area that we are by statute required to work with, and it's a very rigorous engagement. They vet all of our project documentation. They provide feedback, and ultimately OPDC requires their endorsement to proceed through the various stages of this project. And it is only through their endorsement that we will be able to begin implementation later this year. And lastly, there's a steering committee, and it's a committee that is made up of both internal and external stakeholders that helps drive the strategic decision making. It's comprised of agency leadership and external stakeholders like our LFO and the Oregon State Chief Fiscal Officer. So it absolutely does take a village. So what will FCMS do when the dust settles? It will modernize our financial invoicing processes, provide automation to our current manual accounts payable process in general. This system will replace the Nintex system and will be the central landing pad for all of our time entry and reimbursement requests. It will be the singular case management tool for our appellate and trial divisions. It will be the central location that stores and secures our case data. With this approach, we improve how we track and monitor cases, how we can then automate task assignments and other routine procedures. Lastly, as it is the central tool for the agency in regards to reporting, we will be able to easily generate reports on metrics, case outcomes, payments, and billing trends, and workload distribution. But before I get into the agenda, I would like to introduce our panel members today. Miss Emiche Perfecto is unable to be here this morning. She had an unavoidable conflict. But as our Deputy Director of OPDC and the project sponsor, she is ultimately responsible for seeing that this project follows through on our agency goals and is aligned with our agency mission and vision. I'm David. Again, I'm the Chief Information Officer, and I'm responsible to see that the technology is correctly implemented, that the system is aligned with our business goals and processes, and is implemented and configured correctly. Mr. Greg Sevedy, he is my Chief Data Officer. His technology focus is on the data in the system itself. And he and his team are responsible for ensuring that the data is secure, but also is available based on your role and your identity. You'll hear from Miss Mary Knobloch, my Senior IT Project Manager. She's the conductor and central to all of the moving parts of this project. There's not a single piece of this project she and her team hasn't been involved with. Mr. Ron Hittner, our oversight partner, he will introduce himself and share in a minute, but Mr. Hittner provides a third-party and unbiased view of the project and will focus on identifying project risks, communicating those out. Miss Tracy Colbert will be sharing as well. Miss Colbert is part of the project management team. Her role has been to work directly with future users of the system, both internal and external. She has documented business processes and diagrammed process flows so that FCMS will work and operate how our users need it to. And lastly, Miss Jana Hart. She is our Chief Procurement Officer. And it is a big thanks to her and her team that we will soon close this chapter of the contract procurement and soon move into the implementation phase of FCMS. Mara, I think there's a slide you could probably move forward on. There you go. So those are our panel members. And Emiche was going to say a few words before we got into the agenda. And in her absence, I'll speak for just a couple more minutes and we'll jump into the agenda. And I'll just say, 2 years ago, I joined OPDC and relaunched the FCMS project. Since then, we have built a team of world-class professionals, individuals of high integrity, deep expertise, and genuine passion for our mission. They recognize the short thread between their efforts in the advancement of legal defense services in Oregon. The panel present today represents just a portion of the many exceptional people who have dedicated their time and their talents to bring this project to its current stage. While much has been accomplished, our work is far from finished. However, thanks to the strong partnerships we formed and the remarkable team we've assembled, I remain optimistic despite the challenges that I'm certain lie ahead. We are prepared to move forward. So with that said, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hittner to share next. Is Ron here this morning?
He's here. His audio doesn't seem to be working. Ron, can you try again? Still not working, Ron.
Well, maybe if he's willing to sort it out while we move through the slides, he can actually finish at the end of the slide presentation. It's not a very long presentation that we have here this morning, but hopefully Ron can sort out his audio problems and we can hear him present here in a minute. With that said, I would recommend we move forward with the slide presentation.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear my audio? Just
Yes.
checking. Hey, thank you, Chair Harris. Welcome. My name is Mary Knobloch. I am the Senior IT Project Manager. So where we are now in FCMS, contract negotiations resume with the DOJ review and legal sufficiency review of the statement of work, contract, and final exhibits. After reviews complete, we will then move into approval rounds with anticipated contract execution by May 29th, 2026. And next slide, please, Mara. We have heard from a lot of you that you would like to know more concrete dates as to when the FCMS system will go live. One of the primary questions we received in prior commission meetings was many providers are pausing their efforts to look for case management systems for their firms while they wait for confirmation from Oregon Public Defense Commission as to when our FCMS system will go live. And we are excited to provide that information to you today. So on this slide, you will see key implementation dates with an external provider focus. So the key activities that will drive this project start with contract execution and state approval. All of those activities will conclude on June 11th, 2026. Following, we will have a kickoff with our vendor. This will be an internal open house for the internal agency employees in June of 2026. From mid-June 2026 to January 2027, we will be onboarding our vendor, setting up the development environment, reviewing requirements with our vendor, going through a methodical exercise to double-check architecture and design components, and confirming our solution development plan with our vendor. This will conclude 2 years of effort of gathering all of the material needed to develop a robust system for providers and internal agency employees. In October 2026, we will be prepared to have a kickoff for our external provider community and external end users. You see the development of FCMS system as the next line item with a dash through that. All of those activities I just mentioned before carry over through that time frame. And from mid-January 2027 through April 2027, we will actually be building the FCMS system and completing development in April of 2027. There are some other key activities that go on after development, such as training for our internal employees. But again, with an external provider focus, our go live internal FCMS deployment will be at the end of September 2027. Then we will take that time to go through and train our end users. External user training will occur between December 2027 and early January 2028. Lastly, after all of the many processes, development, everything has been tested, verified, and working, we will be ready to go live with the external community in January 2028 through March of 2028. This is a rolling wave implementation plan to ensure that we roll out FCMS carefully, methodically, and to ensure that everything is working and ready to go live with all of our users. We will revisit this schedule at the end, I'm sure, with other questions, but at this time, we'll move forward with the presentation. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Culbert, and I've been an analyst on the FCMS project since August of 2024. Since that time, process documentation has been occurring across all the impacted divisions of OPDC, mainly focusing on finance, trial, and appellate. Processes performed by and data collected from the external users were also documented. The intent of the documentation served multiple processes, ensuring that the original 800 requirements that had been identified were still valid, capturing new requirements as part of the agency's current needs, incorporating process efficiencies and applying standardization so that a sustainable system and processes can be used in years to come. The result of the documentation is over 150 process flow diagrams, user stories, use cases, and a 1,700 line change tracker, which will be leveraged to determine the training needs for all user types and roles. The agency subject matter experts' documentation discussions identified that the majority of the changes will occur around the following processes: invoicing, introduction of case type maximums, pre-authorized expense requests, timekeeping, system integrations for data, and system logic process automation. Due to the significant changes in these and other processes, in-depth training is planned for all users, both internal and external. Thank you for your time. Next slide.
At this time, our panel is ready to provide you with robust detail on any topic you'd like to explore further in the FCMS project. And before we open it to the community here, I will turn it over to David to address one question around data that came in a prior commission meeting.
Thank you, Mary. Correct. So we have been listening to these commission meetings. We've been trying to pluck any comments or questions and come ready so that we might know what might be on your mind. So the question that we heard was around data. And to paraphrase a little, the question was if there was a reason why we didn't have the same kind of data on external attorneys that we do with our agency attorneys. So was there like a uniform way to get this level of information from the other providers? What kind of data will we be collecting from external attorneys? So that's what we heard. That was the question. And to answer that, actually, I would hand the microphone over to Mr. Greg Sevedy, my Chief Data Officer, to have a response.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Sevedy. I am Chief Data Officer at OPDC, and I've worked here about a year and a half since November 2024. I'm the second of two IT managers, David being the other, obviously. The way I wanted to address this question was to tell you what we're doing to work on this issue. We conducted some internal sessions that we labeled External Provider Framework Series, and those were internal work sessions where we analyzed and documented currently how we're collecting data from external providers and what data we're collecting. So we've done that work, and that will prepare us for when, as Mary mentioned, the contractor vendor comes in to start working with us in June through January of 2027 to do the analysis work. So we'll be ready to work with them to figure out how we're going to collect information through the new system and what information will be collected. So that's how we're addressing that issue. Are there any follow-up questions?
Thank you, Greg. Before we move, I don't want to miss Ron. It sounds like he's back and working here. So if it's okay, I'd like to hear from Mr. Hittner for his presentation, and then we'll move back to finish the question and answer. Ron?
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. My apologies for, I'm not sure what was going on with my laptop, so I switched over to my phone here, and again, apologies for that. But good morning to commission members and everyone on the panel today. My name is Ron Hittner. As David mentioned, I'm with Hittner & Associates. We're based here in Oregon. We've been providing independent quality management services to Oregon agencies and the legislature for about 20 years. And my company's job here is to provide independent third-party quality and risk oversight on the project, as David mentioned. So in doing that, we evaluate the project's processes and products. From a quality perspective, we identify risks and make recommended mitigation strategies for those risks, and also recommend corrective action plans for any issues that may arise. And so I wanted to give an overview today of our perspective on the project just for a minute or two here. And then certainly, again, as part of the QA, happy to answer any questions. Overall, as we sit today, we have the project as a medium risk on a scale of low, medium, high. And this will be the case at least until a contract is signed with the apparent contractor. And so you've heard about that a little bit already and where things stand there. This is typical for any project at this stage. Typically when negotiations are going on, as we all know, we've negotiated contracts. Things can go wrong up to the point of contract signature. So there's always a medium risk associated with that. So that's not unusual. And as you heard earlier, the work is progressing to finish the negotiations and get signatures so that the implementation work can begin. From a risk perspective, the things that we're monitoring, the latest development that we've been looking at and involved with is the draft project schedule, which we reviewed a couple of weeks ago. I want to recognize the significant amount of work that the team put into that schedule to get where it is today. We had several meetings with the project team to go through the schedule, provide our feedback and recommendations. And we feel that the schedule as it sits today has good detail and identification of links between project tasks as well as assigned resources. And all of these things are critical to manage the project effectively and proactively. So we're pleased with where the project schedule sits as of today. The procurement for the apparent contractor has been very thorough. We have provided these independent quality management services, as I mentioned, for about 20 years to dozens of agencies. And this is definitely one of the most thorough procurements we have seen in that time. So the agency has done a good job in being very thorough to select the best vendor and work to get the best contract in place with that vendor. Lastly, on just kind of evaluation of how the project has been changed, and you've heard already about the organizational change management contractor that's on board, Baker Tilly, and change is a critical part of any large project. This one is not any different from that. The agency made a smart decision, I think, to hire an experienced OCM vendor in Baker Tilly. Some agencies decide to go it alone on that. Those tend not to go well because OCM is a very specific skill set. And so it's smart to bring a contractor in that does that for a living. And Baker Tilly is a very solid contractor in that area. And so we support the fact that they are in there as a contractor working and helping to guide the activities as they go forward, not only in change management, but also to support training as well for the project to be successful. Overall, as we evaluate about 50 individual areas of the project. And at this point, as of a week ago, all of the individual areas that we evaluate are either stable or trending in a positive direction. So that's good. Trends are very important and things that we track carefully. So key items that we're evaluating going forward, just to wrap up here. One is obviously the contract finalization with the apparent contractor. That's a big task that still needs to be finalized, and the project's getting close there. Secondly is baselining the project schedule. As I said, the project schedule is in a good place right now, but until the contract is signed with the vendor and scope is nailed down, et cetera, the schedule can't be finalized. So waiting for that to be baselined. Thirdly is engagement with stakeholders, and this is a big one. This is part of the OCM task, but particularly with external services providers. Some projects, deal with only internal users. This is a somewhat unique project in that you have the internal users within the agency, but also external providers, attorneys, et cetera, that are involved and that are affected by this project. So that's a very key component that we are monitoring very closely in the coming months as far as communication and involvement with those stakeholders. And lastly, then, once the apparent contractor has a contract signed, we're going to be monitoring their work very closely. Early days of a project with a vendor are very key to identify what the quality of their work is going to be, and also do they have the proper sense of urgency. There is no extra fluff in the schedule. And so, which is appropriate. I think the agency wants to have an aggressive schedule to get the system in place as quickly as possible in a quality way. But that means that everyone has to have the proper sense of urgency. And so we're going to monitor that very closely, particularly with the vendor, to ensure that they have that same sense of urgency. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, David.
Thank you, Ron. Well, we've presented quite a bit this morning, quite a bit of information. A number of things have been presented, and we did kick off with a couple questions. One was around the data, and then Mary mentioned around the external provider open house that will be in October. So with that said, I would like to make a space and opportunity for those that are in this meeting to ask any questions they may have on their mind.
Mr. K?
Yes, maybe you've gone over this, but will the adoption of the case management system be mandatory for external providers?
That might be a Ken question.
Yes, I would defer to Ken. My role in this is to make sure that the technology is secure and implemented correctly. How we are going to strategically engage with our external providers is something that I would feel best offered up to Ken or Amiche to answer. Unfortunately, Amiche is not here this morning.
Well, yeah, I could jump in here. And what I had intended for this presentation, so we have ours today that talks a lot more about process. And as we begin to go forward, we can provide a lot more detail, because when we ask that question about, are folks required to utilize the software, I think it depends on in what way, right? In the same way that as of today, the way that you would submit bills to the agency is through our Nintex process. In the future, it's going to be through our FCMS new software that we develop, and that's the entry point into our system. And so in that sense, there would be a requirement there, in the same way that for the most part there's a requirement through Intex now. Now, of course, we do have situations that pop up where our Intex form is not necessarily crafted for a very specific one-off situation, where then there may be communication by email, and so there's always exceptions to the rule. But for the most part, if you're submitting billing, for example, to us, then you would be required to use it. But beyond that, we're still working on developing what that looks like. And so I think that having a more detailed breakdown of the actual things that FCMS does, and then, like with a matrix that shows like where that interaction will occur, I think that would be best for a future meeting, that we could lay that out in more detail and much more specifically for you, Commissioner Kay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Olson?
How to find my mute button. Is this going to be something that'll be like, and it may have been covered before, but is it going to be like a shared cost? Like, are providers going to have to pay for the system, or is this something that's provided? And is that changed depending on how many, attorneys are in there? Is it by user? I don't know if that's.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great question. And that is one I feel I can answer. The system is not going to have a cost to our external providers.
Thank you. Commissioner Plummer.
Thank you for this information. Super helpful. Could you just list again the 5 processes that will be available to external providers? You went through them, and I was writing down, but I missed some of them. So it'd be helpful if you could just review what those 5 things are.
Can I hand this back over to Ms. Tracy Colbert, and maybe we can find that slide?
Sure. So thank you. The processes that will be most impacted are invoicing, the introduction of case type maximums, pre-authorized expense requests, timekeeping, and system integrations for data and system logic process automation.
Thank you. One follow-up, and maybe this is more in the weeds than we can get today, but when we're talking about timekeeping, is that timekeeping software that will be available to external providers, or is it more a place for them to enter their time? Does that distinction make sense?
So I can take this if you don't mind. With regards to timekeeping, for the internal users, there will be a live timer mechanism available. For external users at this time, there will be a place for them to input time.
Thank you.
My audio broke up for that first part about the internal. Could you just repeat that? Sorry.
Internal users will have the option of using a live timer if they desire.
Thank you. Commissioner Engelsman?
Thank you. I'm curious, and maybe someone else is going to ask this, but I'm curious just to follow up on that live timer. Is that a software that makes it? So when I was timekeeping, there was I would keep notes of what I was doing when I was running around to so many places, and at the end of the month, I would then have to input those notes into a spreadsheet and then send that on to the person in charge of our office. And so it was kind of like a three-step process, for probably even more steps, depending on what the person in charge at the top had to do to submit that. It was a multi-step process. And so I guess I'm curious what this live timer looks like that would be available to internal contractors, or that's the wrong term, but internal providers. And if it is something that is going to make the process much easier and faster for overworked providers, why we can't offer it. Maybe people don't want to use it, but offer it to external as well. So that's my first question. And then the second question I have is, as is often the case when new software or new processes are rolled out, there can be, after everything is sort of like worked through and then showcased and started, there can be problems that arise in the 6 months, year, 2 years going forward. And so I'm curious what support the vendor will provide as part of the contract and part of the cost to providers who are sort of figuring out how to use this. Thank you.
So I'll go ahead and take those two questions if the panel doesn't object. And Chair Inglesman, we'll start with your first question around seeing how the timer works. I would encourage everybody viewing this presentation today to really earmark the internal open house and external open house. That is where the vendor will be providing an in-depth demonstration on how all of these functions and features work, and the timer functionality will likely be part of that demonstration, and they can actually walk through and take questions during that time. Is that sufficient?
Yes, except that I'm curious why something is being, it sounded like the timer is going to be offered to internal providers, but not external. And so I'm curious why, if it's a better system, why we're just not offering it. Maybe we don't want, maybe external providers don't want it, but often having the choice and deciding not to use something is different than us just not having a choice. That sounds like it's a better option, an easier option. So that was my question.
Okay, thank you, Chair Inglesman. I will address that part of the question. So for
Just Commissioner, not Chair.
Oh, Commissioner, thank you, Commissioner, for that clarification. For our internal users, we are very specific around the policy for timekeeping for internal employees. And so the automated timer fits that need. For external providers, due to our license type with the system, that automated timer feature is not readily available. And also, we are still working out the point that Ken brought up around what exactly is required for the external provider community. And we wanted the option to input time, but we're still following the agency's lead on policy around timekeeping for external providers. And at this time, it did not make sense uh, in our feature alignment to move towards an automated timer for external providers. If that need changes during the time we bring the vendor in and the agency directs us more so on policy around timekeeping, we would revisit that. Does that help clarify?
That does. And then the second question about vendor support following a rollout.
Sure. I will open this to the rest of the panel. Maybe David or Greg or Gianna, is there anything you'd like to input on that second question? for vendor support?
Thank you, Mary. I'll kick this off. And feel free, team, if there's something that I'm missing, feel free to fill in the blanks. As far as support long term, my team, my staff within the technology division has a very short line between us and the vendor in regards to support. So the expectation is that our external providers do not need to reach out to the vendor for support. They will be reaching out to my staff and my team. And the expectation is that my team will be able to handle almost all of it. It's not like we are just going to then call the vendor on your behalf, but we know the answers. We know how to support the system. As I shared earlier, I've been able to bring on some very talented technologists that are going to be able to take the baton from the vendor after we go live. But from a support standpoint, the vendor, from our support agreement with the agency, is we have a very good service level agreement in place with the vendor, so that it's not one of those where we're going to be, or rather, you're going to be in a space where you're going to be waiting days and weeks to get an answer. We have high expectations for turnaround for any questions or issues that come up.
Right. Thanks, Commissioner Knapp.
Thank you. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to maybe follow up on the idea of, what kind of access and functionality the FCMS system is going to have for external providers. And what kind of access they're going to have to that system. Are they going to be able, so they're not at least initially going to be able to keep time within that system. What is it going to do beyond billing in that initial iteration? Is there going to be access to a case management module or something like that? And I guess my more broad question is essentially what are the benefits? What are the anticipated benefits to the external provider community of the migration?
I can start this panel discussion, and for the rest of the team, please feel free to jump in. I would say, excuse me, Commissioner Knapp, this FCMS system for the external provider community is really beneficial for the 4 pillars of FCMS. So for timekeeping and inputting time, reporting, and also invoicing, as well as case management to the extent where case assignments will be input into the system, and external providers will be able to access their case assignments within the FCMS system. When we go into broader questions around to what extent is case management allowed for the external provider community, that conversation will develop further with our external provider change champion group that we've identified, and also a time during the fall where we will engage with our external providers to walk through all the features, functions, and processes that we alluded to today, to walk through all of the work that will be done in the system for the external provider community. I can confidently say today that our case management system will not be a repository for discovery data for the external provider community. We are not, we do have some boundaries around that space that we can, again, further delve into, as Ken mentioned, with more of a matrix around functions and features that the external provider community will be able to take advantage of in the FCMS system. But I believe the major advantage for now is to get timely payments and invoices through the FCMS system. Is that sufficient for now?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Plummer?
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, I just want to try to summarize, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but so the idea is that, so for the trial division and the appellate division, this would function as their wholesale case system. For external providers, it's anticipated that they would, for the most part, be maintaining their own separate case management systems, and this is more about managing providers interface with OPDC. Is that an accurate summary?
That is an accurate summary, Commissioner Plummer, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I have a couple of questions. To follow up on that last question by Commissioner Plummer, will the external vendors be able to track their time on this? Just to keep an open case and just do the time like an hourly billing type lawyer and submit their bills through that? Or would they have to keep their time in the separate system and then have to re-input it into this system?
I will open this detailed process question, Chair Harris, to Tracy Colbert. And then again, if we need to come back and give a presentation on the timekeeping for providers, we can do that as well, Chair Harris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Harris. The proposed design right now offers flexibility to the external providers where they are able to input time on an as-needed basis to track their time within the system. They will also have the flexibility to keep time on their own and submit that into the system on a scheduled basis, maybe once a month, once every couple of weeks, etc. So that's the proposed design that will be brought to the vendor that I'm sure that they would be able to implement.
Great. That sounds good. The other question I had here is data security, I guess. After this is up and running, will the current vendor, the person who is the entity who is doing the architecture and the implementation, and you guys are doing implementation, I guess, but will they have any access to any data that users enter going forward after the system is in place? Even if it's anonymized, I mean, any access to data, or is it all belonging just to the agency?
I can take that question, Chair Harris. This system is being built within OPDC's tenant that we own, we manage, and it's built on the Power Platform. It's the Microsoft. So this is the Microsoft environment that we purchase, we own, and the system's being built within our own environment. And the vendor will not have access to data after this is built.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to address one question someone had about whether or not this would be required or not. I do want to point out that the rollout date for this of early 2028 is going to be mid-contract. This is for the commissioners, not necessarily for the team, which means some of this is going to be a policy discussion by this commission. And it's probably also going to depend on how well we keep to the calendar on this. But the training and rollout is going to be 2028, like I say, which is mid-contract. So the contract will probably address some of these issues, and I don't think that decision's been made at this point. It's going to be probably dynamic based upon on other factors like timing. So those are really good questions. It's something we're going to have to ask every time and keep in mind as we come up to our next contract period. Commissioner Kay?
Yes. Will this system have case progress note capacity internally or externally?
And I think that is a great question, Commissioner Kay, and I will turn that over to Tracy.
Thank you, Commissioner Kay. Yes, you, as a user, you'll be able to see case progress through the system with key milestones or points within a case that are occurring.
Commissioner Knapp?
Less of a question and just more of a comment, as this comes into fruition, and I know that we're just seeing a snapshot of all the hard work people have done up to this point. But I just think for this to be an effective system, it really needs to focus on making the jobs of our external provider community easier, and provide function and form to those users. So I would just hope that as this is kind of being created and being implemented, that the needs of the external provider community are centered in that. And I think that's where efficiency to the public defense system is going to make a cost like this worthwhile. So I just wanted to add my little 2 cents.
All right. Thank you. Any further questions or comments or observations by commissioners? David, thanks for you and your team for all the hard work you've done. I really appreciate this. This has really been somewhat clarifying for me. And then maybe it's easier as we go further along here for us to see the bigger picture coming into place. So I appreciate it and looking forward to this. And I think you've got a lot of these questions handled. A lot of questions I had 6 or 8 months ago, I don't have any major concerns about anymore. So I appreciate it and all the hard work you've been doing. So thank you, David, and thank you to the team.
Thank you, Commissioner Harris.
Next, we're scheduled for a break, but I think what I'd like to do is sort of move on, and at least we have the next audit committee updated charter, and that is not going to last 45 minutes. It's going to be a short presentation. I'll hand it over to Vice Chair Mandenberg to give an update to the commission.
Thank you, Chair Harris. You all received a memo and draft charter that we were going to discuss. After those things have been posted, we received a number of comments. One is actually posted, one was not sent in the normal way, that have raised some concerns that I think need to be addressed carefully before it comes before the whole commission for discussion. And so I would like to table this until a future meeting. Some of the concerns that were raised mostly have to do, the ones that I think most important to address have to do with openness of the process to scrutiny by people outside of the audit committee, and the makeup of the audit committee itself. So there are a number of sort of technical things that are involved in addressing those concerns. And there simply wasn't enough time in between when those concerns arose and this meeting to do a credible job of addressing them. So rather than waste everybody's time in discussing something that needs to be revised anyway, I think it makes more sense to table the discussion until we have the time to do a competent professional job of addressing those issues. That's what I would like to suggest.
Thanks. And just to let everyone know, there have been some discussions between Executive Director Chandrian and Vice Chair Mandenberg and myself when we reviewed the information, and I think we have something in place. I don't know, Susan, did we have a time where we're going to try and place this back on the calendar?
I think we don't at this point. There's at least one item that needs to be, I think, addressed in consultation with lawyers at the Department of Justice before we can present a very secure response. And we have not yet been able to make that appointment. And so I don't want to set a specific date until we know what the cadence is going to be of all that.
Yeah, and to give a little bit of extra background, there was an original audit committee charter when this commission was reformed about 2 years or so ago. We were operating under that for about a year, and then there was a fundamental change in how that was going to be set up. In the meantime, of course, we lost our general counsel as well, and the governmental subcommittee worked really hard on trying to put stuff together. And then we had a new audit chair come in, and then sort of a new direction. So this new charter would have been a pretty significant change in the past charter. And so as it came together, we had some voices expressing concern about some specific items that arose in this last week. And they're legitimate. A couple of them for sure are legitimate. We're going to be looking at those, asking the DOJ for input, and we don't have general counsel, so we got to schedule that. And until we have that advice, I think we are reluctant to move forward and approve anything. The next audit committee meeting is scheduled for June, what, 10th, 9th or 10th or something.
It's June 8th, but my understanding is it's going to be canceled because there's no agenda and because there's no usable charter.
Yeah. And that's been discussed with our chief audit chief auditor Scott. Was it Martin? Scott. And
Yeah.
yeah, and he's agreeable to that. He doesn't think it's going to impair the work he is currently doing. And so there's going to be a little bit of a cadence issue depending on when DOJ is available and when the next governmental subcommittee. But we're trying to get this back in front of the commission as soon as we can because it's been a long time. But we also want to get it right and make sure that we're following the law and the legislative intent. And so that's why, unfortunately, we don't feel this is ready to be voted on today. That sort of gives you a little background and that's why we don't know the exact timeline because of the DOJ scheduling as well.
Let me just say that we've been working on the governance subcommittee has been working on one aspect or another of the audit committee since I started on this commission 2 years ago. So
yeah.
it has I can't even count how many drafts we've been through in one form or another. So this is just once again unto the breach. And I'm pretty confident that once we can consult with our folks who are experts at DOJ, that we will have something to present to the commission in July. That would be my best guess. It's going to take at least, in addition to talking to the DOJ folks, it's going to take at least one more audit committee meeting, governance committee meeting, and maybe a work group. But I think that we can get it finally pulled together by July and bring it back then. That's my hope.
Yeah, and we had talked about pulling this item off the agenda altogether, but we thought it was important to give everybody an update as to why it came off and the time frame that what you can expect going forward. And answer questions because we know this has been on hold or not on hold. It's been worked on, but we haven't been able to get it completed for some time. Commissioner Engelsman?
Yes, thank you. I just wonder, to Vice Chair Mandelberg, would sending thoughts, questions to you on what I did read in preparation for today be the place to send? I'm seeing a nod from Chair Harris. Okay.
Send them to Mara.
Okay.
And in order to avoid the serial communication problem with public meetings laws, we have been operating on sending things to Mara. Mara will do a compilation of the input that she gets and then make that available to the governance committee at its next public meeting. And so that way, everything that comes in will be shared with the public.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I would encourage anybody else on the commission who has input, give it sooner rather than later, because that way we can deal with it and not have to table this one more time.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we'll take no action on that today. So we went through the break, but we're at a little before our break time anyway. If people would like to take a short break before the last item, we can do that. Otherwise, it looks like Director Sanchgren has about a 30-minute presentation on the defense forecast. Is that right, Ken? Is that still your time frame on that?
I think it all depends on how many questions commissioners have as far as whether we get to 30 minutes or not.
So if you'd like to take a short break, raise your hand so I can see it, and we could certainly take a 5 to 10-minute break. Okay, I see at least a couple, so I think that's fair. So let's go ahead and let's reconvene then at 10:25. Okay? Thank you. Welcome back. Okay, it's 10:26, so let's go ahead and get started on the next agenda item, which is the forecast, and that is Executive Director Sanchagrin's presentation. Ken, are you there?
I am.
All right.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, today I'm going to go over the April 2026 Public Defense Forecast. I know we have at least one new member who has not seen our presentation that we did on this back in December, and so I'll start with just a summary of what the forecast is and how it impacts our budget to begin. I think it's a good reminder anytime we do this, and then I'll dive into at least what we're seeing initially from the 2026 forecast, which is being used right now for our initial agency request budget. Next slide, please, Mara. Next slide. There we go. Thank you. In SB 337 that was passed in 2023, there was a requirement that was new for the commission, and that requirement was that we were to rely from that point forward on a caseload forecast that was created by the Office of Economic Analysis within the Department of Administrative Services within DAS to form the basis of our budget for funding external providers. We're required by statute to use it in preparing our budget, but then also we can use it for any other purposes deemed necessary by the commission under the statute. And this is following a roadmap or a foundation that is used in other arenas across the state. Many state agencies have their budgets set by caseload forecasts within the public safety system. This is most similar to the process that is used by the Oregon Youth Authority for their forecasting, and then also for the Department of Corrections for their inmate forecasting as well. In fact, the professional over at DAS who does this work is the same one who prepares all of those different forecasts. And the forecasts are created twice annually. They're by statute to be released in April and October of each year. And those forecasts are used in different ways through our budget build process as we go into our long legislative sessions that we'll talk about in a slide or two in just a moment. Next slide, please, Mara. So how does the forecast fit into the budget development timeline? This is a basic roadmap because the budget development timeline may differ depending on the year or governor's administration and how the governor would like to construct their budget. But basically, what we're oftentimes thinking about are in this illustration is our budget build in even years. So we are always building budgets in even years, looking forward to long sessions in odd years. So in an even year, like this year, 2026, in January, we've already done some presentations kicking off our budget development process. And what the agency is trying to construct at this point is our agency request budget. And so we begin that work in January. There's normally a kickoff with CFO, and we begin to build all of the things that we'll need to go into the next long session to make our request for funding. The way that the forecast works is that the April 2026 forecast or any April forecast in an even year is going to be used for the basis of our agency request budget. And so that's what we're doing right now. We are able to take the data from our forecast, and then the folks in our budget department, in consultation with our contract administrators and our researchers and myself, we're able to then translate that caseload forecast into actual budget numbers. We then include that in our agency request budget, which for us is due at the end of this month. Then, following the submission of our agency request budget, we do receive feedback from CFO, the governor's office, and DAS on our budget requests, with the goal of eventually getting to a governor's request budget at the end of the year. Between now and the end of the year, there will be an updated forecast that happens in October that will be used to update our numbers as we move towards the governor's budget. And so for each iteration of the forecast, it is used in a portion of budget development that helps us to arrive at the final number at the end of long session next July. Next slide, please. And I'm going to skip this slide real quick. We'll go into this one's a little bit messy, but it really lays out what I was just stating. We could follow this our budgets through the entire process. We are near the far right-hand side of this slide now, where the April forecast was released in Q2 2026. And that, as I mentioned, this is what's going to form the basis of our agency request budget going forward. Next slide, please. So when we look at what is reported through the Office of Economic Analysis, we did include the most recent report in your meeting materials. You can also go to the Office of Economic Analysis webpage and you can get the report that was included, but then also all of the detailed case tables that I'll be talking about as we move forward. Those tables are not really easy to attach to meeting materials because they're spreadsheets that are about this long, and so we can't PDF them very easily for you, but those are easily accessible, and I'd be happy to share the link if that's something that you're interested in looking at. But in the actual paper report that provides a narrative as well as the methodologies that the Office of Economic Analysis uses in creating their forecast, what is included is, first, there's always a discussion of legislative or policy changes that could impact the forecast. For example, looking backwards at some policy changes that have had relatively, I won't say major impacts, but at least significant impacts on our funding going forward. We could think about the recriminalization of possession of controlled substances in House Bill 4002 a few years ago. In the last long session, there was House Bill 2005, which changed the standards regarding civil commitments, which were predicted, and the data is showing it has increased the number of civil commitment hearings across the state. In addition to that, the Office of Economic Analysis forecaster will rely on FBI crime data, Oregon population data to construct an at-risk population for the state. All of these factors go into, along with past caseload data, to predict what the future is going to look like moving forward across the state when it comes to caseloads. And so all of these items are included in the paper report that is filed, the one that we included with your materials today. Next slide, please, Maura. In addition to that, the actual detail of what the caseload forecast predicts is also included. And so what will be included here, and this is from an old forecast, I'll be showing the new items in the next few slides, is we have first biennial estimates of new cases entering the system that would be eligible for public defense. We also have an analysis of how prior forecasts are performing in the current biennium, so we can actually see the degree to which the forecast is accurately predicting what we thought we would see. There's also breakdowns across different case types that are provided, at least at the felony level, that would coincide with our MAC calculation system that we currently use. There are also detailed tables that account for existing caseloads, and so there's a caseload forecast that is included. And then two, one thing that's really interesting and has been refined over time are estimates of case episode lengths based on OJD data, broken down by case type. In the past, that was expressed merely as an average. But now we also have, in addition to the average, the actual spread of cases. So we could see how quickly some cases, maybe at the lowest end, resolve versus cases that take much longer, and then the mean in the middle that the agency has been trying to rely on for other data work that we're doing. So what I'll do now is I'll transition into the 2026 forecast, and happy to take any questions as we're going through. Feel free to interrupt me. So next slide, Maura. So first, what we're going to talk about real briefly is the performance of the forecast that was used to set our final budget that we are currently operating under. So I mentioned that the forecast we have right now, for example, in April of 2026, that creates our agency request budget. The forecast that will happen in October of this year is going to set the governor's budget. And then the forecast that happens in April 2027 is what they will use at the legislature to set our final budget. So what we're comparing here on this slide is now looking backwards, which I'm sure is not confusing at all. We're trying to see how the forecast back in 2025 that set our final budget we're currently operating under, how it's performing. Overall, what we can see is that the number of minor felonies, or the number of felonies overall, is coming in lower than we predicted, though most of that change is being expressed at the minor felony level. You can see overall a change at the felony level at the top of around 1,800 cases fewer than we expected. But like I said, that's mainly based on the minor felonies that we can see as you go down that column, the change column in this table. Murders are also down. Murders are down around 18 or almost 19%, or 54 fewer murders cases have actually occurred than were predicted. Jessica's Law cases are above forecast level of around 13%. Civil commitment cases are up substantially by around 2,000, or by over a third above what was forecasted. Habeas cases have a pretty large percentage increase compared to what we predicted, but are around 174 over what was predicted. And we've seen that juvenile dependency cases are down by about 10%, while juvenile delinquency cases are up by 17%. I will note that some of the differences that we're seeing across the forecast now compared to the one that was used to set our budget are tied to data quality improvements, particularly within the Jessica's Law realm, but then also within the civil commitment area as well. We know that Jessica's Law cases historically have been undercounted within the forecast. In fact, we have an illustration that's coming up in another slide or so that will really show the impact of that. So I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail there. But then civil commitment cases, we know that they're higher, partially due to House Bill 2005, but then partially due to, again, changes in the way that the data is actually recorded at OJD, and then sent over to be used by the caseload forecast folks. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail on a slide that's about civil commitments. But overall, the forecast is performing relatively similar to what we predicted, or what the Office of Economic Analysis predicted back in April of 2025. And I see Commissioner Inglesman. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to jump in, but it seemed
No,
easier than
please do.
having to
Yeah.
ask you to go back to some slide that I wasn't sure which page it was. I think, again, I'm misreading this, but the left-hand side says juvenile dependencies fell by 10% while delinquencies up by 17%. But the right-hand table,
Oh, no.
well, am I misreading?
Yeah.
The right-hand table has the opposite, dependencies going, I mean, it has a positive number and a delinquency has a negative 17. So is that an error on here, or am I just misunderstanding and this is like a April 2027 forecast?
No, it looks like I just
Okay.
transposed those two. The chart is taken directly from the report, so we can fix that and repost when we're finished. I appreciate you catching that. That, yeah, just flip those two around. Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions?
No, but I was going to point out something for commissioners. The ones who have done juvenile law probably know this, but a 10% increase in dependency and a 17% decrease in delinquency isn't really a wash because not only the number of cases actually, but also um, dependencies generally take longer than delinquencies in my experience. So even though that might look sort of like a wash, it's really not. It's sort of like the same difference you pointed out in, the reduction in murders but the increase in J laws sort of thing. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. When you look at the bottom lines of like boy, we're in 0.8%. We got that right on the spot, but you may not have actually in workload. So I was just pointing that out.
Thank you, Chair. That'll be a perfect segue into the next discussion
Oh, sorry.
oh, no. Like I said, we could not have planned that better. So I'll take Commissioner Knapp's question, but that's what we're going to be talking about moving forward is how sometimes what appears to be small differences are not so small.
No.
Well, you're probably going to answer this in the next part, but I was going to just ask on, how you can essentially equate for changes in practice or procedure that make cases, even if cases are going up and down, they make cases take longer, the advent of body-worn cameras or something like that. So how in the forecasting model are you able to um, translate the case numbers into actual cases done, or does that happen at a different point in the forecasting?
Yeah, that actually happens outside of the forecast. And so what the forecast itself is merely trying to determine the number of cases that we predict will happen. So the length of time that those cases will take, or actually then how it's translated into our budget, how it's translated into the number of lawyers we would need, that is actually all performed at the agency level, not at the Office of Economic Analysis level. So Michael Kennedy, who is the economist who does this work, he is merely concerned with are the number of cases going to go up or down, and what is the number of cases we predict. I'd be happy to talk about the process that we use internally for the budget build. That might be better when we have the budget numbers, and so that could be more appropriate for our next meeting if we would like to have more of this. If you guys are not bored to death by me on this one, then I'd be happy to bring it back. But I will mention that one thing that we're working towards internally that's really important to me is to have some transparency about that process that you just asked about. How do we get from a forecast model that simply, like if you look online, what you would find at the moment for like our new eligibles, for example, is broken down by crime type. There would be a sheet on the spreadsheet for each crime type. So we have murder, Jessica's Law, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's a simple breakdown by year within the biennium of each county, and then how many of those cases are predicted each year. And so, as I mentioned, Michael Kennedy is only interested in and is only required to figure that out. We then have to do all the translation to talk about the impact. So to increase transparency around that process as we've actually matured and how we figure this out, my plan going forward is to have a document that we can release at the conclusion of every forecast period that lays out that budgeting methodology that we employ, and then actually has an analysis of each forecast that we can release to you, we can release to the public, we can circulate to folks so that anybody who has a calculator and can do simple addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication could actually reconstruct how we construct that budget report going forward. That's what my goal is. We're not quite there for this one, but that's what we will have. My hope is we can have that for October, to have that releasable so that we can have more transparency around this, because it's a complicated process. It's not so difficult that it's not, like I said, you should be able to sit down with our methodology printed out on one side and looking at the spreadsheet online and follow through all the formulas, like I said, with your calculator or just through Excel. But that's where I want to get to so that folks can understand what the impacts are and how we get there.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Next slide, please, Maura. So now we've kind of begun to transition into this a bit now. So the prior slide was how is the current forecast performing? This slide is now prospectively looking forward as to what we can expect as we move into the budget build for our next biennium. So again, we do see some upward and downward trends. We do see that new felony cases are predicted to increase by almost 1,500 cases, or 3.4%. We do see that misdemeanor cases are forecasted to increase by over 4,000 civil commitment cases above even the elevated increase that we've been seeing in this biennium are predicted to continue to increase by almost 10% themselves. We do see again, and I think this goes to our Chair Harris's comment that juvenile cases, they look flat, or a slight decrease of 0.1%, but that really masks that we have growth in one area, and then contraction in the other as far as delinquency and dependency cases are concerned. But even beyond the small differences that we can see by high-level case types, like felonies versus misdemeanors versus other kind of case types, we do see a lot of detail that I want to go over that gets at Commissioner Harris's point as well, that differences in case types are not just one for one. So that, the increase in a felony or a decrease in a felony and increase in a misdemeanor are not one for one when it comes to our budget process. And that's something that I'd like to go over in the next couple slides, unless there are questions about this one right here. I'll pause just for a moment. Okay, so not seeing any hands. Hopefully the visualizations on the next few slides will be useful because it's fewer just raw numbers that we're looking at. So next slide, please, Mara. So we're going to go through a couple different case types now to look at the trends that we're seeing over time. And the first one that I'll point out is I mentioned that in the current forecast, when we're looking backwards compared to what we were thinking back in 2025, but then also going forward, there is a prediction of there being fewer murder cases across the state. I think that that's mostly tied to we saw a spike in violent crime and in particular murders in the immediate aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic that has since stabilized back to historic trends that we've seen over time, which is a very slight upward trend across the state. And so relative to the prior forecast in April 2025, which predicted a steady increase in murder rates over time, or murder cases, excuse me, over time. Now, what the data is really showing is that we are in this period right now of fewer murder cases being filed than we thought. And so you can see that in the kind of purplish blue line on our chart to the right. We will then resume going into the next biennium a very slight upward trend in murders, around 2 to 3 cases per year, but that overall baseline has now been shifted down. And so previous forecasts would have said that we would expect 20 to 30 more murder cases per year than the current forecast is predicting. And this is one of those instances where, because murders both are very expensive from a MAC perspective, because MAC expectations for murders are 6 cases per year, but then also because we have our policies related to co-counsels serving on murder cases, this is something that can actually have a pretty big dollar impact on our budget. I think a good illustration of this is when we received the October forecast of this past year, which is not used for any type of budget development. The overall difference between one forecast to the next was only 216 cases. And so when I saw that, even as a data person, I said, oh, that's no real impact at all. But when we just went through the exercise of pricing out that forecast, hypothetically, if it was being used to set our budget, I believe the impact of those murder reductions was around $6 million. And so what appears on its face, or what could appear on its face to be a relatively small change, depending on case type, can be pretty substantial. And so this is something that we're paying attention to. I think it also plays into, when we've looked at some of our statewide murder contracts, some of the MAC on those contracts have been a little bit under what we predicted. And that may be just because there are fewer cases out there to be taken. I see Vice Chair Manenberg has her hand up.
Thank you. When we're putting together the budget based on these forecasts, obviously, the forecasts are for the number of actual cases, but not every single one of those cases will require a public defender. Some of them will go to retained lawyers. So is there a constant percentage that we figure in for the percentage of cases that would need court-appointed lawyers? And if so, does that constant differ with the type of crime, or with felonies versus misdemeanors, or with adult versus juvenile? How do we figure in how many of those cases are going to be ours?
That's a great question, Vice Chair. And actually, the answer to that is a little bit simpler than your question. You'll notice that all of the charts here, they're the murder new eligible cases. And so actually, this is not a caseload forecast for the system writ large. This is an eligibles caseload forecast just for us. And so we don't have to apply percentages or constants or any of those types of things because this is based on historically the cases that have gone to public defenders.
Got
And
it.
so then it's looking prospectively at what we would expect from an eligibility standpoint.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Um, another data trend that you'll see, which looks even more interesting or surprising, is the Jessica's Law new eligible cases. And I think this really illustrates what I was mentioning before, that there's been substantial headway made in the way that we're able to track Jessica's Law cases through the forecast. At the OJD data level, historically, and as you can see, because it looks like there were none of them back in 2018. Historically, this is not information that was necessarily contained on the pleadings. It was not necessarily information that was kept at OJD as far as a differentiation between case types within their data tracking system. It is very relevant for us because of the way that we calculate MAC for Jessica's Law cases, but it was not really within their wheelhouse as far as tracking goes. And so that has in prior forecasts led to some pretty low numbers that we know are not correct when it comes to Jessica's Law cases. I think when I first arrived at the commission and we were looking at the forecast that had been just released a day or so, before my arrival at OPDC, the prediction was that Multnomah County would have 2 Jessica's Law cases per year for the next several years, which we know is not correct. But that was a data quality issue. But the data quality that we've been seeing has been improving substantially. And so I think in this case, most of the increase that we're seeing, so you can see the April 2025 forecast, which is more of a pinkish line versus the blue line. Most of that increase is due to improvements in data quality that we're seeing, not necessarily an upward trend in the commission of Jessica's Law type crimes. And so I just wanted to make note of that. This is an area that we continue to see improvement in, but we're also continuing to work in checking our data against OJD data to make sure that we're getting much closer on predicting Jessica's Law cases. Regardless, however, this increase, even if it's just due to data quality because we were undercounting in the past, now, if we are appropriately accounting for it, that means that we're going to be in a better budget position to adequately fund those cases compared to where we were in the past, where they were not being counted sufficiently. Next slide, please. We also have some detail around our misdemeanor and felony cases. So I've tried to keep this as brief as possible. I'm not always very good about that. For our Measure 11 and major felonies, the graphs for those are contained in a very short appendix. It's just one slide appendix because there's really a nominal decline that we see in the number of Measure 11 felonies and nominal growth in major felonies. Those lines are so close to one another. I didn't necessarily want to waste your time with those, but feel free to look at those in the appendix of this presentation. However, for minor felonies and misdemeanors, we do see more of a gap between what had been predicted previously and what we're looking at now. And so that minor felonies are forecasted similar to what we were seeing in even the reconciliation between prior forecasts and this one. Looking forward, we are also predicted to see fewer minor felonies going forward. And while that is a constant number, the gap between those two lines for minor felony new eligibles between the April 2025 and April 26 forecast is around 900 per year that we're seeing. Now, that doesn't mean a cumulative 900 per year. It just means that that's what that gap is looking like moving forward. However, on the misdemeanor level, the gap that we're looking at is around 2,000 cases per year, so that we do predict misdemeanor cases will be filed at a greater rate than was previously predicted in prior forecasts. Next slide, please. Then finally, we have our difference in civil commitment cases. This is probably the largest difference that we see across the forecast. We believe that this is being influenced both by improvements in data entry and data quality, but then also due to the actual increases in civil commitment cases due to the changes in HB 2005. Prior to the recent forecast that we're working with now, there were different data entry practices across the counties as far as what counted as a civil commitment case in Odyssey. Some counties were counting everything where there is a filing, and that would more correspond with what we would be looking at because then lawyers are doing some work on that case, even if there's never a hearing. Other counties, however, were only recording in OJD that there was a civil commitment case when a hearing occurred. And so some were undercounting, some were more accurate than others, but we believe that we're getting more accurate data across all counties now after this was an issue that was discussed amongst the forecast group that includes OJD in the past. And so we see that a pretty substantial increase. We can see that this is an increase that, unlike the others that are pretty constant over time, that there is actually some growth. And so I included a little bit of detail here for the overall difference in the forecast by year moving forward. And so that gap is around 800 for 2025, around 800 for 2026, but then accelerating into 27, 28, 29 to a more constant 1,200-ish cases gap, which is pretty standard. Usually those lines flatten out as we go over time when we're looking at forecasts. And so this is an area where we're certainly going to be looking. We may need to contract for additional civil commitment attorneys across the state. This is a real increase, compared to something like the Jessica's Law difference that we're seeing. And so what we're working on right now is that pricing of the forecast. Like I said, it's due at the end of the month. I'd be happy to take kind of an informal poll now if folks would like to have a more detailed discussion about how we actually translate this from forecast to budget next month. Be more than happy to. However, if I've already overwhelmed you with too many charts and data and you would not like to see that, I am more than happy to not bring that to you as well next month. So happy to take your feedback there or any other questions. I see Commissioner Kay has her hand up. Oh, and you're muted, Commissioner.
Are you tracking guardianship cases?
Guardianship cases are outside of the forecast, and that's something that was given to us much more recently. And so while we're tracking them, it is not necessarily something that's included in the forecast.
Okay.
And
Commissioner Engelsman?
Thank you. I have a quick question on the episode lengths for the dependency cases that I notice are just under 15 months on average. And I'm curious, I imagine that you're tracking the length that an entire case is open rather than an attorney has it open, because obviously in dependency cases, there could be one or two or three or multiple children who have different attorneys, and then multiple parents, sometimes three or four parents involved who have different attorneys. And if some of those or all of those parents don't come to court, eventually the attorney will be removed from the case, and it could look like a short case process, even though the actual overarching case continues for potentially years longer as the kids work their way through whatever process. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at the case number and how long those stay open.
Those are great questions, and some of those I may have to come back with in the future. I don't have all of the details, so this is not based on our data. This is based on how OJD is going to be tracking those dependency cases, so that I may have to get some detail there. One thing I'll note is that, as I mentioned in the past, we would just get that average, which you are correct. It's around 15 months. But when you look at the spread now that we have in the most recent forecast, you'll notice that, interestingly, that average length of 15 months is very, very close actually to the minimum number. So like that mean is being pulled down, whereas, and I just pulled it up for myself, I could share if folks would like to see, but it looks like the longer, so the other end of that tail is around 39 months. And so certainly it looks like in the data, they're accounting for some of these dependency cases that take much longer. However, that I would have to delve into more deeply the actual business practice of OJD and how they record those cases. And then also, you're right, how they account for the different number of siblings. We've talked about that internally as we're pricing. And so I know that it gets very complicated to make sure that we're accurately accounting for all of those. But I'd be happy to come back with it if you'd like more detail on it. But I don't feel confident to speak to OJD's data tracking practices at the moment on that, just off the cuff.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Manberg?
I would like to have your more detailed presentation about how it gets translated into
Great.
the budget. I also have another question about how the data are put together. And excuse me if I missed this in your introduction. The number of eligible cases, or putting it differently, the number of people who are eligible for a public defender seems to me to be affected by the economy.
Right.
As more and more people are losing jobs or having to pay for medical care out of pocket, um, how does the forecast account for changes in the economy when they're figuring out the demand on the public defense system?
I think that's mostly done through what is characterized as the at-risk population, and given the large percentage of cases that already qualify for a public defender, I think that some of those economic effects are muted somewhat. This is it, but that's something I think that it's a good risk to think about, because what I would normally say is if we had a forecast that has been stable for 20 to 30 years, then we would have some of those historical economic impacts built into the forecast that are then able to be used to prognosticate forward. We don't really have the benefit of that. I mean, of course, like we just showed, like with the Jessica's Law cases, even back in 2018, we said there were none. And so that's something that the stability of this forecast is probably less so than we would look at for a corrections forecast, but it is something that as we get more data over time, then we're able to, it's able to be built in. But then too, one of the benefits of doing it every 6 months is that as conditions change, we're able to have those discussions moving forward. This looks like it is 100% science, but there is also some art to it. And much of what happens when we have, so I skipped over the slide just for brevity, but an initial forecast is created just using the numbers by Michael Kennedy. And one of the nice things about Michael Kennedy is he's a brilliant person, but he's also somewhat detached from all of the happenings in public safety, which I think allows him to be very objective as he's putting those numbers together. But then we all come together and have discussions about what are the dynamics that are happening within the system. For example, one of the things he's always been very interested in is, how does the crisis create constraints within the system that may also affect the numbers that he's looking at, as far as, being able to get enough attorneys for folks, and especially like whether there are case backlogs out there or cases that have yet to be filed that could be filed as we're coming out of crisis. And so he's very focused on those policy impacts, whether that's wider economic impacts or other things like that. But oftentimes that's done through discussions at the meetings that then can be built into any refinements he makes as he releases the final report. And so that's something that we can talk about moving forward. But compared to some of the long-term forecasts, we're a little bit more at risk there to see potential differences. But then too, that's why it's good to have these check-in forecasts. Like even when we're looking back right now, a lot of times we'll see movement in different areas. And so our hope is that always that we have a forecast that is durable enough that we have a sufficient money to move forward. That's what it looks like right now. But certainly those changes could impact things. But luckily, usually too, that's a little bit slower, right? The impacts of the economy are not going to be like a cliff in most cases. It's going to be something that we're going to see come in gradually over time.
Yeah, maybe, but some of the reason I would like to see the translation discussed is one of the things I've definitely learned in my time on this commission is that what we ideally would like in our budget is not what we get
Right.
when it gets translated, for example, into the governor's budget. And part of that is because the economic situation affects the legislature as well. So it affects how much money they have to parcel out. And now that we're in the executive branch, we are pitted against every other executive branch agency, including roads and firefighters and all this other stuff that the legislature clearly has to fund. And I would like to have more discussion and detail about how we balance our ideal budget and our ideal situation for the kinds of things we want to make this a well-functioning public defense system with the politics of what we legitimately can hope to get. Because I think that the difference between those two things is one of the things that causes a lot of tension, uh, for example, between us and our stakeholders.
I think that's correct. I would love to have that conversation. What I would be able to present to you all in June is how we do it at the moment, which is expressed through the Mac lens. And so, it is rather mechanical in that sense. But yes, I'd love to have your opinions, your thoughts on as we move forward, what differences could there be? How could we more adequately, meet the needs like you just identified? So I think that'd be a great policy discussion to have after we just talk about the mechanical way we do it. That would be a great discussion. I think that's actually perfect for in-person discussion as well in our meeting in June.
And I'm glad that you mentioned Mac, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in our previous requested budget, we wanted to get rid of Mac.
That's
And
correct.
we were not allowed to do that.
That's correct.
So I think this translation phase, I think and the politics around the translation phase, I think is something really important.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions or comments? I have two things, Ken. Would you say the forecast is going to inform our agency budget, which then goes to build the governor's budget? Is that also what we would call CSL, the CSL budget, current service level?
That's
So
part of the CSL. Yes. Yeah.
right. So when we see current service level, that's including these extra civil commitments, but you've redone it. You've said this is what we need to do the forecast, right? Is that what that means?
Yeah, it basically the forecast helps us to create the CSL budget.
Okay.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we could use those essentially interchangeably.
And then whatever, if we have any pops or requests, we would do those as a pop, which would be a policy option package, which would be an additional funded project or whatever to our current service level. Is that the way the agency builds the budget?
That's right. That's right.
And we'll see any pops that we have in August type time frame. Is that correct?
We'll probably have a good idea of which ones are making it through the process then, but then it is not uncommon for some pops for you to really not know to what extent it's going to be in the governor's budget until the budget is released in December.
All right.
I've in my historic time working across different agencies, most of the time we know, but I do have an example from the last governor's budget when I was at CJC where we had a program that we requested funding for, and it was almost like getting a surprise in December as to the exact amount that was included in the governor's budget and kind of how it was worked in.
Okay, and also to work this current service level and translating that into budget dollars, we're going to be continuing using the current MAC weighted system. Is that right?
Yes, at the moment, yeah. We'd like to be able to move past it or to make refinements to MAC, but that's what we have at the moment.
And we have been gathering data and information on time taken to resolve different types of cases at the state trial division.
That's correct.
And that was going to inform us to maybe change the weighted system. How's that process, or is it still going, and how's it going?
So after we build the CSL budget, that my plan had been to transition into having more stakeholder-driven discussions about MAC and what a future without MAC could look like. And at that point, we could bring in the trial division hourly information if that stakeholder group would like to look at the amount of time we're spending on cases. I think that I mentioned that there have been fewer murder cases across the state. There's probably less disagreement about the amount of time that it takes for a murder case, but like we don't have as many of those at the trial division to probably have a real stable estimate as the number of hours. That may be true with Jessica's law as well. But when we look at the other case types, we should have enough of those cases to feel pretty confident in those averages we have. And so I think that it should be part of the discussion. I don't know if it'll be dispositive for the folks when we talk in a wider stakeholder, group about it, but I think it would form a very important part of the conversation. But we have that tracked actively, and so we can bring out those numbers essentially whenever we'd like to. It's something that's ongoing, and with each additional case, it just makes those averages even better.
So we're talking about putting it through a stakeholder group. Who is the stakeholder group? I mean, we're the commission, so tell me
Right.
about that.
Well, and that's something you and I have touched on that a little bit in some of our one-on-one meetings. I mean, I think the stakeholder group is a wide group. It can include commissioners to the extent that commissioners want to be involved. But when I say stakeholder group, I'm primarily talking about practitioners and putting together a group of practitioners and contractors um, to inform us. I mean, I think we all know what I'm most interested in is whether we talk about our practitioners, even over to judges, prosecutors, everybody essentially dislikes Mac, but I've rarely heard a very detailed, articulated replacement for it. So I think a lot of it is coming together to talk about what the replacement should or could be. That also is, at least in this current budget environment, something that we would be able to get across the finish line legislatively. And it doesn't mean I don't want to shoot for the stars, but we also have to think kind of pragmatically, as well as idealistically, as to what steps we could take to move into a different model. And so for a stakeholder group, I would envision it being almost entirely practitioner based. But I know that we have heard a lot of concerns about Mac, for example, from judges. I think that whether it is a singular group or maybe different focus groups, that we should take into account some of the opinions of other public safety partners as well, just so that we don't roll out a new program that comes under constant attack like Mac is from different groups as well.
Well, we do have to be thoughtful about this. I agree with this, but to me, this seems like it would be of some priority, honestly. And we can talk offline on that
Yeah.
during one of our weekly check-ins. But I would like to get that process started because we do have data that we could use, at least in some case types. And if anyone sort of has knows how Mac came around and was developed, there's not a lot of factual basis behind Mac. It was gut feeling by some folks at the agency.
Yeah.
And it started way back with, well, it's 400 misdemeanors a year. Well, let's see, how many lower level felonies could you do if you did 400 misdemeanors? I don't know about, this many, 200 or something. And any work group you get together with data is going to be immensely better than the current weighted system. I can tell you that. I think this is a major complaint of a lot of providers, and I think it would give us a lot more clarity and the legislature a lot more clarity as well if we could move forward on that. And I think ultimately that's going to come to this commission. So I would encourage us when we put this together to have at least some commissioners involved in this, who have some expertise in this. Um, Theoretically, we're supposed to be neutral as well, more neutral as well than providers who are doing this work. And that would be my goal or my recommendation, I guess, to the agency when you put this together and present it to us.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah.
If I could just add on that, I do think there is consensus around a workload model instead of Mac. So, there may be obviously the devil's in the details on exactly how that goes, but it seems like a workload model um, the industry standard, not just in Oregon, but around the country. And so, I mean, I think when we're talking about moving away from Mac, it really does seem like there's urgency to it, but also that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And certainly I don't know that it's helpful to talk about it in terms of that um, because this is the industry standard everywhere. This is what people do in to assess lawyer caseloads across practice areas and across jurisdictions. Obviously, again, devil's in the details, and that's a different lift. But I think talking about it in terms of moving to what is an industry standard makes a lot more sense than kind of taking on moving away from Mac as if it's going into the darkness. So
Sure. And if that was the perception that came from my prior statement, I apologize. I mean, I think what you just said is exactly where I'm at. The devil is in the details, because the details are exactly what we would need as an agency to be able to translate any type of model into budget, for example. And so maybe when I say I've not heard a well articulated replacement, it's more from that detail standpoint that if I was to take a workload model kind of writ large today and try to apply it to our forecast, I wouldn't know where to start. And so we need to talk about what those details are because that's going to form the foundation. I mean, and it's a huge in some ways it's a huge change budgetarily because no matter what we have, when we come up with a new model, I think as Commissioner Harris or Chair Harris kind of pointed out, anything above what we've done in the past is a pop. And so we're going to have to get that pop in a very, very well articulated way down on paper. It has to make it through the governor's process. It has to make it through the legislative process. And so there are multiple stumbling blocks to any type of replacement to Mac that we have to overcome. And the devil is definitely going to be in the details for those. And if we cannot provide the details on how it works to justify whatever the dollar change is, then we'll be right back where we are right now, which is, we've tried this before. And it did not make it through the process, just to put it simply. And so we want to make sure that if we do all this work, I want to feel pretty good that we're going to make it through.
Let me just add that the workload model is what was in the 6-year plan that we put together with Moss Adams. And that was the basis of what we tried last time. And so again, my memory is not what it used to be, but I think that the problem was that although the model was there, the details were not clear enough. And my guess is that we didn't have the data to back it up. And so I agree that what we need is data that is not only accurate, but that is persuasive, that we can make that model work in a way that the governor and the legislature have confidence in it.
That's right. Yeah.
But certainly the research that was done in putting together that 6-year plan is not something we should jettison. I think it's something we can build on. A lot of work went into that.
I agree. I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Plummer?
Thank you. I really appreciate the ideas about, stakeholder engagement on the workload model and figuring out the devil in the details on that for sure. I think I agree, it'd be super interesting to see the time data from the State Trial Division. I just want to state a couple things, sort of in the apples to oranges category when we're using that data. I mean, one relates back to what we were talking about earlier with the ERD dockets, just making sure that those are probably not included in MAC. And then second, we also have to be careful about the fact, I think, that the State Trial Division has resources that the contractors don't necessarily have. So, they have funding for case managers, that sort of thing, that contractors do not. So even if we take out those ERD cases, it may not be a one-to-one comparison. And so I just want to put a pin, flag that so that when we're looking at that data, we're being careful about how we compare it.
Right. And we'd be happy to, and any stakeholders that can bring any time tracking data, then I think we should certainly not use State Trial Division data to the exclusion of others. We would need to have then help from stakeholders to bring their data forward so that we can make comparisons. But until I ask and until folks say yes or no, then right now state is what I have at our disposal.
Yeah, and there's different ways we could use that data too. Like you might say, well, yes, they have better resources, so they're not tracking the case manager time versus the lawyer time, whatever it happens to be. But you could also sort of say on average, a low-level misdemeanor felony takes twice as long or something. So and then you could look at how many cases and what their current MAC utilization rate is, which may or may not be relevant because that sort of reintroduces the current case weighting system. But there's a lot of data, but I just think it has to be data informed, process as well as stakeholder informed. So I agree with everything everyone says. I always get a little concerned when people say we need a workload model because, I mean, that's Mac is a workload model. Detail wise, though, it's different than what a lot of other places use or consider that. So I appreciate that, but it's just a lot of details. The other idea is if If cases get reweighted in some way based on the data, I don't know, Ken, this is going to be an answer for question for you, I guess. But if we reweight them and it turns out that we just have to have lower caseloads given these new weights, is that a pop or is it just a current service level that we get to increase our current service level rather than have to ask for a pop? Um,
So
that's
you're saying, for example, if we reweighted and just picking numbers out, if we said that misdemeanors were now the expectation would be 200 per year, whether
Yep.
that would be a pop. That is something that would be a pop, at least from the feedback I've received from LFO
Okay.
in the past, is that yes, if we were making changes like that, and maybe it would also come down to if, and this is just a ridiculous example, but if we made changes to where we said that a misdemeanor expectation was no longer 300, it was 299, and so therefore when you actually built it through the CSL budget, the actual dollar difference was negligible. That may not be a pop, but I would assume that that's not the level of change we're looking at. And so I think that in some ways, whether it's a pop or not is a little bit of art, but I would go on the assumption that any changes we're making would have to be a policy option package ask.
Well, if we just said we're still using Mac, we're just changing the weight.
Yeah,
Then
that would still be unless the change was negligible. I would say that that would be a pop.
okay. I was just trying to think of ways to get anything
I
like
know.
that into the CSL instead of having to go through the pub. All
Yeah.
right. Any other comments or questions? So do we want a more detailed explanation of this? At least one commissioner does. I love this
I'm
stuff, so
seeing
I
several
love it.
nodding. Yep, yep.
Yeah,
So
all
we'll do
right.
that for next time.
We'll put that on for next time. Yep. Great. Thanks, Ken. Let's see. Trial division budget.
Yep, you get to listen to me some more
Yep.
and ask me more questions. So, yeah, Mara can pull up fewer slides for this one. You can go to the first slide, Mara. So, um, as was introduced actually earlier a little bit, during our last commission meeting, I provided more of a full breakdown by division of our budget. And what we were showing in our April commission meeting was that as far as the trial representation division budget was concerned, we were showing a projected deficit by the end of the biennium of $5.24 million. And so what this little chart we have here on the right reproduces is just these were the line items that were displayed during that meeting, the calculations that were used to arrive at that number. And so you all requested a detailed breakdown of our division budget. I had mentioned in that meeting that much of the difference that we were going to see going from month to month was actually attributable to House Bill 5204, which was the end of session bill passed at the end of the short session that had yet to be signed. And so we were not accounting for all of the monies in that bill, but I've got detail on that. And just as an overall summary, as we move into what this deficit was attributable to at the time, because we'll see that the numbers are quite different now, is mainly two things. The first was the cost associated with hiring attorneys within our trial division as the trial division was being stood up at salary steps that were above those that were assumed in our legislatively adopted budget. But then also, as I just mentioned, the budget at the time that we reported it in April, while it included the projected expenses for our new trial division positions that were granted to us during the short legislative session, the budget did not account for the additional revenue that we would have to pay for those positions, which created, at least in my opinion, an artificial gap that as we go through the detail here, we'll see how those changes are enacted all the way through. So we'll just dive right in. I apologize. There's lots of numbers on these slides, but happy to break down and talk about those as we go through. So next slide, please, Mara. So a little bit of detail on that first driver as far as the gap within our trial division budget. So this is a detailed breakdown of the February projections that went into what you all saw at the last meeting. And this is in our personal services area. Personal services is the area that is driving any deficits that we would see within trial division. And this is where we see the impact of hiring attorneys into trial division who are at a step that is above what is legislatively assumed. So across all state budgets, there is a standard assumption that the legislature employs when providing an agency with positions that it did not have previously. And that assumption is that every person who will be hired across the entire state for any new position will come in at a step 3. It's basically just a budget assumption that's made because they have to decide an assumed step in some way or another. And so step 3 is what is assumed. And so for our trial division attorneys, we have 2 different classifications. We have our deputy attorneys and our senior attorneys. Both of those classifications, the assumptions were hiring at step 3. The scale for our deputy attorneys is a 7-step scale, and the scale for our senior attorneys is a 9-step scale. As we were standing up our trial division as we were going into this current biennium, most of our new hires, after we conducted a pay equity analysis, qualified at around step 5. And so there was a 2-step difference in what was presumed in our legislatively adopted budget versus what was actually happening on the ground. Pay equity is something that is mandated by state law that we must do. It is something that occurs at the final stages as an offer is being assembled. DAS basically instructs us by policy that we do that on our candidate that we're going to make an offer to. And then we would do it on other candidates only if the initial person turns us down. And that's basically a formulaic process based on a calculator, again, that we don't really have any control over necessarily. And so that's how those offers are made. And so it's not really the hiring manager that makes a salary decision. It's HR through this calculator that makes the decision on how someone's going to be hired. And so the impact of hiring folks above step both occurs in that salary area, right? Because that's the direct salary that a person's going to receive. But it also impacts their benefits and taxes, because as we all know, that's all calculated as a percentage of your salary. And so the way that the state usually trues up an agency, because the legislature recognizes that this presumption that every single person is going to be hired at a step 3 is not what's going to happen in reality. Some people come in at a step 1. Some people come in at a step 9 if there's a 9-point scale based on their experience. And so agencies oftentimes will have a budget gap, just like we've been talking about here, that needs to be trued up through the legislative process. And we'll talk about in a minute. That's what a phenomenon called salary pot is for. Salary pot will close that gap for the salary that is being actually paid versus what the initial legislative estimate was. I mentioned that here because I do just want to mention that while we received salary pot to true up our salaries, salary pot never covers all of those benefits and taxes. And so that is something where you do not get additional money for those. And so that's something that can continue to be a concern. The one other thing I do want to mention is that as you go from biennium to biennium, once you've hired people, the funding that you receive for them essentially resets to what the person is actually hired at as you go into the next biennium. So any of the issues that we're talking about here will be trued up in our next CSL budget. That's part of what current service level means, right? So if you have somebody who is presumed was going to be at a step 3, you hire them at a 5, then you're actually building into the next budget the fact that they were hired at a 5 and actually that they'll be receiving step increases. All those things get trued up. Though I will note they are also estimates. We can't predict, for example, within somebody's benefits, whether they're going to have another child in the next 2 years, right? And so benefits can change. So there's always some estimates going in, but at least this is an issue that exists now, but is not something that we should see going forward. I know I just put out a lot of information. I'm not sure if folks have any questions here on this slide, but the main takeaway is that hiring above step, especially for a large number of trial division folks, it does create a budget gap that we are working through at the agency. And so this is what we showed in February, but now in a moment, I'll show the slides updated with our recent legislative actions that very significantly change these numbers. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. Next slide, please, Mauro. So now we'll talk about the 2026 legislative impacts. The first thing that I'll mention is the impacts that we have in our personal services bucket. And the first one I've already touched on is this notion of the salary pot. It's the money that we receive from the legislature, in this case, almost $740,000 to bring the actual hiring levels and the actual funding levels into more balance, right? And you'll see that, however, is only done at the salary level. You'll see that salary pot includes no money for services and supplies or for benefits, taxes, and other adjustments. But we do receive that money to help us close the gap there. And that was included in the 2026 legislative session, as it was across nearly all agencies. Almost every agency receives some salary pot money. Teeny tiny ones, maybe they don't, or they receive some negligible dollars, but every other agency receives salary pot to true that up. We also see a funding increase of $3.125 million for new trial division positions. So that is included in the 5204 additions column that's right there in the middle. And then in the services and supplies area, we saw a funding increase of a bit over $500,000 for services and supplies, again, associated with those new trial division positions. But we also had to receive a decrease of around $313,000 in services and supplies, and that was pursuant to the statewide budget reductions that all state agencies had to put forward. And I do in the appendix have a detailed slide of all the changes in services and supplies. That's a much bigger chart, so I wasn't going to include it in the main presentation because it's even more numbers. But you can see the breakdown of where those reductions were enacted across the agency. They were primarily concentrated in reductions in the amount of money that we have to pay for rent. And that's partially due to the fact that we've moved into the Multnomah County Courthouse for our Northwest Trial Division, which just reduces the amount of rent that we'll actually have to pay. So we were able to take a reduction there, but then also some reductions in training money as well, which was something we didn't want to have to offer up, but it's what the legislature decided to choose from our long list of possible reduction options. So when you look at that, the net increase to the trial division budget, when you take into account salary pot, the new positions and their S&S, but then also the reductions in S&S, are a bit over $4 million that were added to our budget in the 2026 legislative session. I'm pausing just a moment in case there's any hands that will pop up. Not seeing any. I'll move to the next slide, please, Mara. And so when we look at where those funds fall into our now current projections, so the projections that we're talking about now for the month that most recently closed, where we have the full month of information, is for March. So this would be the updated budget numbers that we have relative to last month. When our legislatively adopted budget was increased via 5204 in the salary pot, we see that the new salaries number is much higher than it was before. That goes back to the first slide where I mentioned that while we were last month projecting the costs associated with hiring new attorneys, we were never including the actual additional revenue to pay for them, which artificially created that huge gap that we were seeing. I mentioned that salary pot covers compensation, but it doesn't help with our taxes and benefits gap. And so we are still showing a deficit, at least just in the personal services line item within trial division associated with those taxes and benefits issue that I just identified, which I mentioned it will be closed, or that gap will be closed when we move into the next biennium. It's something we're dealing with uniquely in this biennium. And so now what we have in our March projections, both for S&S, but then also for personal services on this slide, is both the projected cost for the TRD positions in addition to the funding that we'll receive for them. Next slide, please. And so when we look at the final division roll up, and so this is how it would be displayed if we were just doing the normal budget presentation that we've done in the past, is that we do have a surplus in our services and supplies area, even with the reductions that we have taken through HB 5204. We've also seen, as we've gone along, you'll actually notice if you compared this month's to last month's, a reduction in the projections that we have, both in the salaries area, the benefits, taxes, and adjustments area, and certainly in the projections for services and supplies. as our actuals are coming in, we are trying to be as as efficient as possible within the trial division, and we're trying to be conservative when we project out, and so our actuals are coming in under our projections. And so in closing this gap, we're seeing a couple different things happen. First, the inclusion of the 5204 money puts us in a much better position, but then our actuals coming in under our projections also puts us in a better position. So if you look at the full division roll-up budget, which is what you all would normally see when we do a budget report, we would actually show a surplus of around $225,000 now compared to that $5 million deficit that we showed last month. But as I was mentioning last month, most of what you all were seeing was just we did not have everything filtered through with the legislative process yet. And so my hope is that this more detailed breakdown, and again, in the appendix, if you're interested, that shows that services and supplies breakdown. We could talk about that if you'd like to, but hopefully this is something that puts your minds a bit more at ease when it comes to the trial division. We still do have some issues, like I said, that will be trued up when we move into the next biennium, certainly around those salaries and benefits. But overall, the division itself, I believe from a budget perspective, is healthy. And the last thing that I'll just mention is that I think this issue that we're having right now is somewhat attributable to, it's not necessarily been standard practice that I've seen in the past from a commission standpoint to do detailed budget breakdowns every single month. And sometimes that's because we have these factors that are being filtered into our budgets through different legislative actions, what have you, that create some of these artificial budget concerns that I think are not necessarily concerns that we have. And so going forward, we're going to be thinking about from a staff perspective the best way to communicate budget to you all so we can maintain transparency, but then also not create worry or consternation where it doesn't necessarily need to be. And so I just wanted to mention that if you see some differences in our budget reporting going forward, we're just trying to hit the right note with you all and the right balance on that. And so I'm happy to take feedback as we move forward, but always happy to do any detailed breakdowns that you all need, just like we've been discussing today. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you have. Hopefully this meets the mark for what you were requesting based on what we had last month.
Questions? Commissioner Plummer.
Thanks, Ken. That was super helpful. I think it was the 3.2 million in new funding that the legislature gave. Is that brand new funding or was that funding that was reallocated from different buckets?
That was funding that was reallocated from different buckets. So it was a budget neutral shift. Yes, when I say it was new funding, it should be new in air quotes because that was not new dollars coming from the legislature.
Okay. And that, if I'm remembering correctly from a previous meeting, part of that was from the adult trial division and part of it was could you just refresh our which bucket?
I would have to use my phone a friend and Ralph if he's on for the exact breakdown, but the majority was from the hourly program, and then there was a lesser amount from the adult trial. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Other questions? I have a couple of things. Is this one of those situations where we have to get a rebalance to move stuff from service and supplies to payroll, or is there any action we have to take to do this, Ken?
No, not for this. We may need to do a rebalance at the end of the year, or at the end of closer to the end of the biennium, looking across some of our other larger budget categories, but within a single budget category like the trial division, we would not need a rebalance for this.
Okay, and I understand that the new budget will be built around these employees' benefits and taxes, and that'll be included in the CSL or the next budget. But the fact that we're moving money or using the fact that we have a surplus in the services supplies for this, will that also be considered? Will that number be reduced in the next current service level because we are doing this transfer of funds?
I don't necessarily think so. I'd have to defer to Ralph on that one. I think there may be some conversations we have with LFO, but right now what we would be looking at, for example, is trying to be very conservative on things like training, and to try to fill gaps. I mean, we do, make sure that we have money available for training, but we may not have as much as we normally do. And so we would certainly fight to keep that SNS so that we can do things at the level that we would ideally like to. But I'm not sure, Ralph, if you have any thoughts on whether there would be reductions there. There you are. Okay.
Ralph Amador, Chief Financial Officer for the Commission. Chair Harris, there would not be any reductions to our SNS. In fact, the reductions that we did take during the session will actually be phased back into our current budget, which is what we're doing now. When we put the reductions up, we had a spreadsheet or a form that we filled out, and we offer these up as one-time reductions to fix a current problem, but that we wouldn't need that in the future.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thanks, Ralph.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions on this matter? Thanks for the information. Actually, that relieves me a lot that we're not $5 million in the hole.
Yeah,
I see Commissioner Plummer has a question or a comment.
Sorry, I just want to circle back a little bit. I do think it would be helpful. It makes me feel better too. I do think it would be helpful to get a breakdown from Ralph about exactly where that funding, the $3.2 million came from. And in part, and I have to acknowledge, like anytime we're talking about contractor funding, I'm 100% conflicted. But I do think it's important for the commission to consider that, because part of the discussion at the last meeting was not just about the deficit for the trial division, but it was about the disparity in pay between the two providers. So I think that is an important conversation to continue. And when we're talking about removing money from the adult trial division, which is for contractors, to pay for the trial division positions, I just think that that's an important conversation to have, and that data is important as the commission continues that conversation. So I just wanted to make that pitch for that piece of data. Thank you.
It's really important because for the reason you stated, because if there's a consortium or a nonprofit, they can say, well, we could hire 2 attorneys to do this work that's showing up in our county and that's going to cost this much. And then we say, yeah, but we're transferring that money to a trial division. How many clients are being served for that? If nothing else, in addition to the cost and the equity between the providers. So I agree.
Yeah, and I can follow up with that today, at least via email, if we don't even have it by the end of our discussion here.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Engelsman?
Thank you. Commissioner Plummer's question sort of helped me figure out how to try to articulate my question, which was on one of the slides. I can't remember which one, but in a nutshell, I guess I'm curious why. I understand that doing a salary analysis is required, or sorry, an experience analysis is required. But I wonder if, because we've heard public comment and we heard public comment today about experienced lawyers moving from an external contractor to the trial division, and that we know that there's probably a pay increase in doing that, and obviously PERS and other benefits. And then the cost that goes into, or the cost that is eaten by the external contractor for the training that they've done before the attorney goes over to the trial division. So I'm curious about why or whether the trial division should be in hiring. I mean, we've all heard you're overqualified for this position. And so if you're hiring an entry-level misdemeanor attorney and you have someone coming from an external contractor who's got 5, 6, 10 years of experience and would be a step 5 instead of a step 1, I'm sort of just throwing numbers out there because I don't know the specifics of the step, obviously. I'm just curious why that the trial division isn't saying, thank you for your application, but you're overqualified for this position. It seems like it could potentially fix 2 problems at once, because of course I appreciate the idea that if you hire someone at step 5, that gets trued up in the next biennium. However, that also means that more money goes into the trial division pot that could otherwise go somewhere else, because it's a pie that is not infinite. So I'm not doing a very good job of articulating all of the thoughts I have, but I am seeing that there's a pool of experienced lawyers who are being trained by the nonprofits and that are moving over. And then there's a sort of a double whammy of effect for budgeting to the whole system. So I don't know if there's anything to say on that or just I'm just commenting, but I just was thinking, and I'm not doing a good job articulating, so I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think that I think you're articulating it fine. I think I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that. And part of what I'm drawing on is just even my experience. I mean, it's something I've not had to do in a few years now, but just my experience as a hiring manager. And most of the time when you have a pool, and I was talking with my HR folks about this yesterday, is that um, most of the folks in the pool meet the minimum qualifications, right? Most people know not to apply if they don't meet the MQs. And in fact, most of them do exceed the MQs. And so usually as a hiring as a hiring manager, since I don't know how pay equity is going to work out, is I am just trying to find the best constellation of folks within that pool. And so I think that the fact that the process is divorced from the hiring manager, it may be a little bit more detailed for us as an agency to go through an entire hiring process with somebody, check their references, and then call them back, the day of the offer and say, hey, we really wanted to offer you this job. And I know we've been checking your references and we asked permission to do all of that, but you're just too expensive for us. We're going to hire the less experienced, cheaper person. And I know even talking with HR that is something that at least from their perspective would open us up to a lot of potential liability. I mean, and we probably wouldn't phrase it like that over the phone, but if our practice was to, for example, run pay equity on everybody on the front end and solely to make, or maybe not solely, but partially at least make decisions based on just who is the cheapest of the ones that we're hiring. That's not necessarily as defensible if those candidates came back later and had some complaints about that process moving forward. So I think that it is a little bit difficult because those of the way that process is set up to think about it in the more holistic way that we were just kind of discussing. I mean, and so it is a tough place to be. I don't know if I have a great answer for that. I think that, and it's also something that I know, at least until I arrived here, that I hadn't really thought about too much because when you, like, let's say you have an entire agency, an entire division, and you hire somebody out of step, usually that's something that your budget can sustain relatively easily, hiring a single person, even if they come in way above step, which I've had in the past, not here at OPDC, but to where you expected, we might be budgeted a 3 and they come in at a 9. That gap is pretty substantial. But most of the time, whether it be because you have other vacancy savings, what have you, that's not it doesn't appear as glaring as some of these do here now, but it's because we're hiring groups of folks. As we've built up the trial division, that it becomes a little bit more acute. I don't think I'm answering your question, but I do think there's a lot of nuance when we're just trying to think about how we go through the hiring process, right? And how we're making those decisions. I think it also seems a little bit counterintuitive to say like if we have a pool of 10 people and they vary in experience from one to the other, you're right. You want to make sure you're hiring the right person for the job. You don't want to hire a 30-year experience attorney for an entry-level job. And that's not something that we do. But then also it would seem strange for us to go through and to say, here's my top 5. I'm going to start with number 5 because I think they'll be cheaper. Because I've also, in my experience, I have to admit, even though the pay equity process is mechanical, I am almost always surprised at what somebody comes in at not running that myself. And I have more experience with that at CJC, where actually DAS ran pay equity for us, and so I was even a farther step removed from how the calculation was done. But maybe I'm just somebody who should never go to Las Vegas, and maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am. But like I could never predict pay equity as a hiring manager. In fact, I was usually kind of offended at what pay equity came up with for my folks. Um, More so than I was usually thinking, oh, this is so much better than they expected.
Mr. Knapp?
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of continue on the same kind of train, and I appreciate what we've heard from Commissioner Plummer and Commissioner Inglesman. And I think that to me the important point. I mean, I think there's all kinds of ways that seem to be pretty simple solutions, like within your job posting, seeking newer attorneys, experience 1 to 3 years, then yes, you have to pay for them, but that's exactly what the nonprofits have to do anyway. But I think the bigger issue is that what's happening is that the system is, and I've said this publicly and to you privately, is that the system is cannibalizing itself. There's counter incentives between the different provider models that are making it so. So experienced providers from one area would go to another, and the pay is not creating incentives for these different models to work together collaboratively. It's creating incentives for them to exist without each other. So, I mean, I think that's a bigger issue, and a genuine issue that needs to get resolved is how are the different provider models going to be able to be in concert? And it can't be where one is clearly more desirable to work at than the other, because you get higher pay and lower caseloads, because that's never going to work either. So, I mean, I just think that that's got to be something. We can't control everything, but certainly within the trial division, that at least perceived in equity is something that OPDC can control, and I think should be addressed. That's it.
Thanks. Commissioner Kay.
Yes, do we have good data on the movement of attorneys throughout the state between the trial division and the contracted workplaces?
We do. I would have to get updated data. I know the last time that I looked at the data that we had, I think it was around a 50-50 split as far as folks coming from pre-existing contractors versus folks coming like from out of state and elsewhere. But that data it's a bit old, and so we would have to look at that again. I know it doesn't include several recent hires. And so yes, we could get that updated data. We do have some data tracking as well for providers at large, because we do see this trading a lot, or kind of cannibalization a lot across provider types to just all provider types across the state. And I think that it is a wider issue that we do face, that we want to grow the profession with new folks. But that's something that oftentimes you can tell that's very challenging across all of our different provider types. But we can work on getting that data updated so that we can provide that to you all. Because like I said, I know that my numbers are a bit old.
I would appreciate that just to get a sense of it.
Mr. Engelsman.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether this is, let me lower that hand before I forget. So on the school board with all of the budget stuff recently, one of our directors asked for the CFO to create a table or a chart that was just really user friendly to see the salary of an average teacher and then PERS costs and healthcare costs and everything else. And so we could see that with ballooning PERS and ballooning healthcare, how that could affect a budget that's outside of our control, and what a teacher salary is a percentage of that. So I tell you that to say that it was really helpful for me and I think the community. And I wonder whether something similar could be created, because I imagine that if there's already a salary disparity between the contractors and the trial division, and then there are healthcare costs that the contractors themselves are paying for out of their salary, as well as the office paying for some of that, which is a PERS over here, and I suspect is not costing these trial attorneys much, if anything. And then there's 401ks versus, like I'd love to see, what I'm trying to say is I would love to see a side-by-side chart within the counties, if possible, of what it costs for a trial level OPDC attorney versus a contractor attorney in whichever counties we have the OPDC attorneys set up. But then also it would just see to someone's point, I think it was Commissioner Nabs and Commissioner Plummer has obviously said it, if it is more desirable to come over here for more pay and lower caseloads, it would be a very clear side by side of this system that we are creating and that we should be trying to fix or just not perpetuate it further, I guess.
Sure. Would you be willing to send me the chart that you mentioned, and
Yes.
we can see about the feasibility? I think some of the information, the information that we have at the commission is how much money we will pay to a contractor, which will include salary and then all of those other costs, right? But I have to admit, like I don't know off the top of my head what our contractors would pay their either their current attorney, like a person who's occupying a current position, or even just an entry level attorney. And so we may need to collect that info, like especially if we wanted a county by county breakdown, that might be a pretty significant data
Right, that's
collection
pretty
effort.
big, yeah.
But send me your
I
model,
will.
and then I'll see the feasibility or just the timeline it would take for us to put it together. Um, the one other comment I do want to make, though, just as a reminder, is that trial division measures MAC like others. I think we still have some questions um, around early resolution dockets, but when I've always said that we need to apply the exact same MAC caseload standards to our folks, and so if to the extent the trial division gets paid more, we should be doing, if we get paid more, then that's for the same level of effort. So it's not being paid more with lower caseloads. That's not something that I would want to see within trial division. So caseload should be the same or similar. We can talk about pay, however.
Any other comments? I've got two comments or questions or observations. The one is that I think that we also need to remember to think about this as workforce, how the workforce sees this, not just how managers see it or how budget people see it or how this affects the trial division budget as far as who gets hired and the step levels. Because um, sure, as a manager of a law firm, I didn't like losing my most experienced lawyers to a better paying job. On the other hand, I think that if I were working away hard in a nonprofit for 10 years and I was doing J law cases or whatever, and then I applied for this position, then I found out that the state hired a lawyer with 1 or 2 years experience and their total compensation package was going to be more than mine. I'd feel not betrayed, but I'd feel like I put in my work and that why wouldn't fine, I'm going to do misdemeanors. I agree, I understand what I'm going to be doing there, but at least I get some pay equity and I actually get more money. And from the workforce position, these positions are probably seen as rewards. And not everyone wants to work for the state, by the way, but to the extent you may want to work for the state and you may want to take a position like this, and you've been slogging away doing this work, devoted to this work for 10 years or 15 years, I would feel as a workforce member somewhat taken aback that the trial division decided to go out of state to preserve the current workforce structure where I was not being paid sufficiently. And I think that from their perspective, it sucks in a way to be a manager to lose your best people. I 100% get that, and I've experienced that. But maybe we need to look at it as good job for training that person up, and now they get to do what they want to do and be more secure with their family because they're just in a different situation than they were 10 years ago when they came to work for me. But the reason I feel that way is due to the pay disparity. If you didn't have the pay disparity, these issues wouldn't be so difficult. And they are difficult issues. And there are two sides to this, and it's a double-edged sword. But if there wasn't such a pay disparity, this wouldn't occur. And I will go back to Senate Bill 377 that honestly, we talked about this happening 4 or 5 years ago. We had this discussion that this was going to be a potential problem, and we would be able to show the legislature that what a real, what full funding would look like and caseloads would look like for state offices, and felt that this would just have to be something to be dealt with. And maybe people just crossed their fingers in hopes the legislature would go ahead and recognize it and see the problem and fix it by increasing the pay for contractors. And maybe they will eventually. But right now, because we have this and because we're growing this, unless the legislature is going to fund uh, more equitable funding across the board to different providers, this is going to be an issue. And I guess I thought about this a lot, both back then and now. And I think I came down to the conclusion that someone who's been slogging away, not slog, who's been working devotedly for either by their own off, doing their own office or doing hourly or whatever it is they're doing, and this position comes up. Honestly, I'd give them priority. I would hire them and let the budget be what it is, I guess, and let the pay rate that they end up getting be what it is and deal with it. I know that creates difficulties, but I want to point out, I guess my point is the issue here isn't who we should hire or who not hire. The problem or the issue that we're related to is the pay disparity that's baked into the system right now. And focusing on that pay disparity um, is a priority, but it's also not something we can fix in the next biennium or two. I recognize that. Anyway, I'm saying it's a problem. I have no solutions. Oh, the other thing I want to say on the PERS. So the way, from what I understand about PERS, so the employer is going to have a pay rate, a rate set, and it's going to be like 28% of your payroll is going to have to go to PERS. But the employee doesn't get 28% credited to their account. Much of that is due to a structural deficit that PERS has built in. So when they say 28%, that's to cover all the beneficiaries and you. So to some extent, Commissioner Engelsman, I totally agree. It would be really great to see total compensation packages. I think that's super important, but I would ask Ken to take a close look at the PERS cost because some of that's not compensation to that worker. It goes into the structure of the PERS program. So I don't even know what that number is, but it's significant. And you saw the PERS bonding on there. I think the PERS bonding was definitely for tier one, tier two retirees, near rate retirees, where they're trying to balance this budget. Anyway, those are the two comments I have. Great presentation. I appreciate it, Ken.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we're at the end of the agenda. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to get some follow-up information as we talked about earlier in this meeting. What's our next dates for work session? I know our next meeting is in Bend on June 11th. We don't have a work session
No, you're
between now
right,
and
right. No
okay.
work session for that. So our next work session would be early July. It looks like July 2nd will be our next work session, but obviously after we're in bed.
And the governance committee, do you remember the next
Governance
meeting?
committee is May 29th, no, not 29th, May 28th, excuse me, a Thursday, May
Okay.
28th.
And we have a legislative committee set, I believe, Ken.
I think we had an organizational meeting set. It wasn't that
Right.
we had a full agenda for it, but I'll double check with Mara on that one. We were emailing about that yesterday.
Okay. Keep alert for your inboxes to get the reminders for those subcommittee assignments. All righty. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.